My son's wife shoved my wife into the wall in front of every guest we had invited into our home. The sickening thud of her hands hitting the drywall silenced the entire room. My son looked me right in the eye and said it was just an accident. I did not yell. I walked my wife to a chair and placed a single envelope on the table. The color instantly drained from my daughter-in-law's face. My name is Hollis Cole. I am 69 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire from the ground up so my family would never have to struggle. Before I tell you how I dismantled my son's arrogant wife overnight, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not given. It was our 45th wedding anniversary dinner. The dining room was filled with soft jazz and the scent of roasted lamb. Megan, Corey's wife, was complaining loudly about the catering, waving her wine glass around carelessly. Yvonne, always the peacemaker, gently touched Megan's arm to calm her down. Megan whipped around with a look of pure disgust and shoved her hard. Yvonne stumbled backward, her shoulders and wrists slamming into the mahogany wainscoting. The crystal glasses clinked from the impact. The chatter died instantly. 30 guests froze. I stood up from the head of the table, my chest tight. Corey, my own flesh and blood, rushed forward not to check on his mother but to step in front of his wife. "Dad, relax. It was just an accident," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "She just tripped." It was a lie so pathetic it hung in the air like foul smoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not cause a scene. I walked past my trembling son and gently took Yvonne by the arm, guiding her to the nearest armchair. She was breathing heavily, massaging her wrist, offering me a weak smile to diffuse the tension. That smile broke my heart and ignited a cold, calculating fire in my soul. For 40 years, this woman had stood by my side when we had nothing but pocket change in a drafty apartment. When I was working double shifts as a mechanical contractor, coming home with grease under my fingernails and aching bones, Yvonne was the glue holding our lives together. She taught third grade all day, tutored kids at night, and still managed to make our house feel like a sanctuary. We endured the ugly stares, the denied bank loans, the systemic walls built to keep folks like us at the bottom. We fought tooth and nail to build a legacy, to buy our first commercial property, to turn one building into an entire real estate portfolio. We gave Corey a life of privilege we never had, hoping it would make him a strong, compassionate man. Instead, it made him weak. It made him a coward who stood by while a woman who married into our money laid hands on the queen of our family. Megan stood there smoothing her designer dress, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder, completely unbothered by the violence she had just committed. She thought we were just working-class retirees who got lucky. She thought she was untouchable because my son was too terrified to put her in her place. She mistook my silence for submission. But a man who builds empires in the dark knows exactly how to tear down a paper castle. I looked at Yvonne, squeezed her hand, and turned back to the table. I walked slowly to my study, leaving the awkward murmurs of the dining room behind. When I returned, the guests had started to whisper, but they parted like the Red Sea as I approached Corey and Megan. Megan had a smug, defiant look on her face, crossing her arms as if she were the victim of an inconvenience. Corey looked like a frightened child waiting to be scolded. I bypassed him completely. I stopped right in front of Megan and pulled a crisp white envelope from my breast pocket. I placed it gently on the fine linen tablecloth right next to her half-empty plate. "Open it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough weight to make her flinch. She scoffed, rolling her eyes as her manicured fingers tore the seal. "I expect this is an apology," she muttered arrogantly. She pulled out the legal document. I watched her eyes scan the bold black letters at the top of the page. 30-day notice to vacate. The smugness vanished. Her mouth parted slightly. Corey leaned over her shoulder to read it, and all the blood left his face. "Dad, what is this?" he panicked. "We live in the Grandview penthouses. You do not own our building." I adjusted my cuffs and looked my son dead in the eye. "I own the management group that owns the building, Corey. I have owned it for 5 years. I let you live there rent-free because you are my son. But this woman just assaulted my wife in my own home. You have 30 days to pack your designer clothes and find a new place to live." Megan dropped the paper as if it were on fire. Her hands started shaking. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, the polite society mask completely slipping. "We have a lease. Corey pays the management company every month." "No, Megan," I replied calmly. "Corey transfers money to an account that I control, which I then secretly deposit back into his trust fund because he is drowning in debt trying to keep up with your expensive lifestyle. You do not have a lease. You have my charity, and my charity just ran out." The entire room was dead silent. Every guest heard the reality of their fake, luxurious life. Megan staggered back, leaning against the table for support as the reality of her sudden homelessness crashed into her. But the eviction was not the final blow. Megan looked down at the document again, her eyes catching the embossed corporate logo at the bottom corner of the page. Horizon Commercial Holdings, LLC. I saw her breath hitch in her throat. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a new, much deeper terror. "That is the company," she stammered, her voice cracking. "That is the venture capital firm I just applied to for my startup grant. I pitched my entire business model to your board last week." I offered a slow, deliberate nod. "Yes, you did, Megan. And I personally reviewed your application this morning. I must say it was a very ambitious proposal. But unfortunately for you, Horizon Commercial Holdings has a strict policy against funding individuals who lack basic human decency and respect. Consider your application permanently denied. Have a wonderful evening and please see yourselves to the door." The sharp trill of my cell phone shattered the morning quiet exactly at 6. I did not need to look at the screen to know who was calling. Corey had likely spent the entire night pacing the floor of his luxury penthouse, panicking over the collapse of his fake reality. I sat at the heavy oak desk in my study, watching the steam rise from my black coffee. The morning sun crept through the blinds, casting long, rigid shadows across the room. My house was completely silent, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I had unleashed just hours before. The phone vibrated violently against the wood, a persistent demand for attention from a boy who still believed his father would magically fix his messes. I let it ring 3 times, letting the anxiety fester in his chest before I finally pressed the green button and lifted it to my ear. "Dad, you have to fix this right now!" Corey shouted, his voice a frantic, breathless pitch. "Megan has been crying all night. She is completely hysterical. You embarrassed us in front of my bosses, my colleagues, everyone. You cannot just kick us out on the street over a stupid misunderstanding. She tripped, Dad. She tripped, and Mom happened to be in the way. It was a mistake. You are overreacting and ruining my marriage." The sheer audacity of his defense hung heavily in the air. He was a 34-year-old vice president at a corporate firm, yet he sounded exactly like the petulant teenager who used to beg me to cover for his wrecked bicycles. "Corey," I said, my voice dead calm, "your wife assaulted your mother. You chose to protect her pride instead of your mother's safety. Do not ever call this house again." I ended the call. I placed the phone face down on the desk, feeling no regret, only a cold, mechanical resolve. A man who refuses to hold his own household accountable must be taught the true cost of his cowardice. I opened my encrypted laptop, navigating through the multi-factor authentication protocols to access my private wealth management portals. The screen illuminated with rows of accounts, trusts, and corporate holdings. I navigated directly to the secondary accounts, the financial life support machines I had quietly kept running to maintain Corey's illusion of success. It was time to pull the plug. The transaction history on the supplementary platinum cards made me sick to my stomach. $3,000 for a designer handbag in Milan, $800 for a single dinner downtown, $5,000 for a luxury spa retreat. Megan had been burning through my capital with the reckless entitlement of someone who believed she was inherently owed my money. Corey allowed it, signing off on the charges, completely blind to the fact that his entire lifestyle was a fragile house of cards propped up by the very man his wife despised. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the well would never run dry. 4 years ago, Corey came to me in tears, hours away from filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He had over-leveraged himself on terrible investments trying to impress Megan's wealthy, elitist family. I did not judge him. I quietly stepped in, bought up his bad debt through a shell corporation, and paid off his creditors. I saved his credit score, his corporate career, and his marriage. I thought I was protecting my son, giving him a second chance to become a man. Instead, I had insulated him from the consequences of his actions, breeding a parasite. I moved my cursor over the master control switch for the secondary credit lines. With a single deliberate click, I froze them all. The platinum cards, the joint checking accounts, the emergency overdraft protections. Every financial artery feeding their penthouse lifestyle was instantly severed. The next time Megan tried to buy a latte or book a massage, her card would decline. The next time Corey tried to cover a client dinner, he would face the humiliating sting of insufficient funds. I logged out of the portal and closed the laptop. The financial bleed was stopped. Now I needed to secure the physical evidence. I walked down the hall to the master bedroom. Yvonne was sitting on the edge of the bed, quietly rubbing a soothing ointment into her left wrist. She looked up at me, her eyes weary but filled with a quiet strength that had always anchored me. The skin around her forearm was already turning a deep, angry purple, a stark visual of the violence Megan had inflicted. "Get dressed, Yvonne," I said gently but firmly. "We are going to the urgent care clinic right now." She hesitated, insisting it was just a bruise and that we should not make a bigger deal out of it. But I shook my head. "This is not about making a deal, Yvonne. This is about establishing a legal paper trail. Get your coat." The attending physician at the clinic was thorough and professional. He documented the contusions, measured the swelling, and took high-resolution photographs of the blunt force trauma on Yvonne's shoulders and wrists. I requested a certified copy of the medical report and the doctor's official assessment. I watched the printer spit out the pages, knowing these sheets of paper were legal ammunition. If Megan ever tried to spin the narrative, if Corey ever tried to claim it was just a gentle stumble, I now had certified medical evidence proving an unprovoked physical assault. We walked out of the clinic into the crisp morning air, the medical folder safely tucked under my arm. I opened the car door for Yvonne, ensuring she was comfortable before I walked around to the driver's side. Just as I put the key in the ignition, my phone vibrated violently against my leg. It was not a text message or a phone call. It was a high-priority automated security ping from my wealth management firm. The screen flashed bright red, overriding my standard notifications with a critical security alert. "Warning. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Someone was currently trying to bypass the security firewall on my primary retirement account." I checked the source details, and my jaw tightened. The hostile IP address was registered directly to Corey's luxury penthouse. They were actually trying to steal my money. I threw the printed security logs onto the polished glass of Aaron Mitchell's conference table. The digital footprint was undeniable, a glaring red beacon of desperation tracing directly back to my son's penthouse. Aaron adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes scanning the breach report with clinical precision. The air in the downtown law office was heavy, thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive coffee that neither of us had touched. Aaron Mitchell was a man who traded in corporate warfare and high-stakes litigation, a predator in a bespoke suit who thrived on dismantling the opposition. He did not flinch at the sight of family betrayal. He leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a silver pen against the mahogany armrest. The rhythmic clicking echoed in the cavernous room, a sharp counterpoint to the absolute stillness of my posture. The glowing monitor between us displayed the failed login attempts, a digital testament to my son's greed. "They tried to bypass the two-factor authentication at exactly 8:14 this morning," Aaron stated, his voice completely devoid of any surprise. "They used your old security questions, the ones Corey would naturally know from growing up. The street you lived on as a child, your mother's maiden name." It was a sloppy amateur move executed in pure panic. I kept my icy gaze locked on the glowing screen. "Corey is an absolute amateur," I replied coldly. "But this specific tactic reeks of Megan's entitlement. She genuinely thinks wealth is a fundamental right, not a secured fortress. She thought she could just crack the vault and wire out what she firmly believes is owed to her." Aaron stopped tapping the pen. The firewall held Hollis. "But this attempted breach gives us the legal justification to seek a preemptive freeze on all their remaining joint assets immediately. We can easily paint them as a flight risk." I nodded slowly. "Do it." But Aaron was not finished. He slid a separate, significantly thicker folder across the desk. I stared at the unmarked manila folder sitting ominously between us. Aaron never introduced new documents without a highly calculated strategic reason. He was meticulous, a legal surgeon who never wasted a single motion or brought up useless information. My pulse remained steady, but my mind raced through the dark possibilities. Corey had always been exceptionally careless with money, but he was fundamentally cowardly. He lacked the spine for overt corporate theft. If Aaron had uncovered something else, something tangible enough to warrant that predatory gleam in his eye, it meant my son and his wife had crossed a legal line far more dangerous than a failed login attempt. I ran a comprehensive background check on their recent financial activities just to see how much collateral damage we were looking at, Aaron said, opening the folder to reveal a heavily highlighted contract. I expected maxed-out credit lines and unpaid luxury car leases. What I found was a signed finalized agreement for a $50,000 unsecured personal loan issued 6 months ago by a boutique lending firm. I looked at the signature line. It bore my wife's name, Yvonne Cole. The signature was a decent imitation, but the loop on the why was entirely wrong. They forged Yvonne's signature to secure liquidity. Aaron continued, his tone turning deadly. They used her pristine credit rating to float 50 grand because their own debt-to-income ratio was completely toxic. Corey processed the digital paperwork, and Megan provided the secondary verification. It is textbook wire fraud. A blinding flash of pure, unadulterated fury coursed through my veins. Yvonne and I grew up in an era where banks drew red lines around our neighborhoods, denying us mortgages simply because of the color of our skin. We had to fight for every single point on our credit score, treating it like a sacred shield. We skipped meals, wore shoes with holes in them, and worked triple shifts just to prove we were worthy of financial trust in a system designed to see us fail. Our financial integrity was our absolute armor against a hostile world, and my own son had weaponized it to fund his wife's arrogance. I reached into my tailored jacket, pulled out my own pen, and placed it firmly on top of the forged contract. We are not handling this internally, Aaron. I want formal fraud charges filed by the end of the business day. Contact the lending firm, provide them with the evidence of the IP address breach to establish a clear pattern of cybercriminality, and immediately notify the authorities. Aaron raised an eyebrow, a rare show of surprise from the veteran lawyer. Hollis, if I formally report this, it becomes a federal matter. Corey will be named as a co-conspirator. He could face actual prison time. Most wealthy fathers would quietly pay off the 50 grand and handle the discipline behind closed doors to avoid the public scandal. We can bury this entirely to protect your family name. I did not blink. I stared right through him, feeling no hesitation whatsoever. My family name is built on absolute accountability, I said, every word dripping with cold, unyielding certainty. Corey sold his name the moment he let his wife lay her violent hands on his mother. He sold his integrity the moment he forged Yvonne's signature to fund a lifestyle of fake luxury. If I quietly pay this off, I am validating his sheer cowardice. I am actively teaching him that a white-collar crime against his own blood carries absolutely no penalty as long as his father has deep pockets. File the charges today. Let the lender issue the arrest warrant. I will not shield a parasite just because he happens to share my DNA. Aaron nodded, a grim, satisfied smile forming on his lips. He pulled the thick folder back toward his side of the heavy desk. Understood perfectly. I will draft the official affidavits and contact the fraud division right now. They will not see this coming. The reality of the impending legal strike settled into the quiet room. Corey and Megan genuinely thought they were playing a simple game of family politics, throwing tantrums to get their massive allowance reinstated. They had absolutely no idea they had just blindly walked onto a battlefield governed by federal statutes and mandatory minimum sentencing. By nightfall, their names would be permanently flagged in the national banking databases. Their credit would instantly become radioactive. Every remaining dollar they had any access to would be completely frozen pending a criminal investigation. They had tried to bleed me dry, and in return I was going to financially obliterate them. As Aaron stood up to call his paralegal, my phone vibrated intensely in my breast pocket. It was not a standard message. It was a silent, high-priority alert from the primary surveillance system I had installed at my private residence. The screen displayed a live feed from the front porch. The high-definition camera showed a figure standing right at my front door. It was Megan. She was looking around nervously, glancing over her shoulder at the empty street before digging frantically into her expensive leather purse. She pulled out a shiny brass key. It was her old spare key. She was attempting to break into my home while she assumed Yvonne and I were occupied elsewhere. She slid the brass key into the deadbolt, completely unaware that I had upgraded the entire security grid. I watched her turn the lock, waiting for the digital trap to spring. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked open with a metallic thud, granting Megan access to my private sanctuary. I had deactivated the silent alarm remotely the moment I saw her on the camera, opting to let the rat willingly trap itself inside the maze before I snapped the cage shut entirely. She stepped into the foyer, moving with the exaggerated caution of a desperate thief. Her expensive heels clicked softly against the hardwood floors as she scanned the empty hallway. She did not know that Yvonne was sitting in the sunroom reading, completely unaware of the intruder. Megan pulled her smartphone from her designer bag, tapped the screen, and slipped it into her breast pocket with the microphone facing outward. She was intentionally arming a recording device, preparing to orchestrate a narrative that would falsely paint her as a concerned family member checking on a rapidly declining mother-in-law, Yvonne. She called out, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet fabricated concern that made my stomach turn. "Are you home?" "It is just me. Megan, I came to check on you after yesterday. Yvonne looked up from her book, her face registering immediate profound discomfort. Megan, what are you doing here? How did you get inside? Megan approached slowly, clasping her hands together in a rehearsed gesture of supplication. I used the old spare key, she lied smoothly. I was just so worried about you, Yvonne. You seemed so disoriented at the dinner party. Are you feeling confused? Hollis has been acting so aggressively lately. I just wanted to make sure you were safe and not feeling trapped or frightened. She was deliberately planting buzzwords, feeding leading questions into the hidden microphone to fabricate a fraudulent audio record of elder abuse and severe cognitive decline. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, parked discreetly down the street, watching the live feed on my dashboard monitor. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Megan was an incredibly dangerous combination of arrogant and desperate. She believed she could manipulate a retired schoolteacher into stumbling over her words, exploiting Yvonne's natural politeness to extract an audio clip that Corey could leverage in a courtroom. I did not rush the front door. I let the high-definition cameras capture every single second of her malicious, premeditated entrapment from multiple different viewing angles. Megan took a step closer, invading Yvonne's personal space. You do not have to cover for him, Yvonne. She coaxed, her tone dripping with fake empathy. We all see how controlling Hollis is. Does he forget to give you your medicine? Does he make you feel scared in your own home? You can tell me the truth. We just want to get you into a nice, safe medical facility where nobody can hurt you anymore. Yvonne stood up, her posture rigid, her injured wrist held protectively against her chest. I am not confused. Megan and my husband takes excellent care of me. You need to leave my house right now. Megan frowned, visibly frustrated that her bait was not working. She turned toward the kitchen island, her eyes landing on Yvonne's weekly pill organizer. Well, I am just going to get you a glass of water, she insisted. She stepped out of the camera's primary angle, assuming the kitchen blind spot would shield her actions. She was dead wrong. Before I built Horizon Commercial Holdings, my first business was a humble electrical contracting firm specializing in commercial-grade security grids for banks and federal buildings. I wired my own home with military-tier surveillance. There were absolutely no blind spots. I switched the feed to the hidden micro camera nestled inside the kitchen smoke detector. The screen illuminated Megan standing by the counter, glancing over her shoulder before her hand darted out toward the prescribed pill organizer. I watched in absolute disgust as Megan popped open the Tuesday compartment, tipping a cluster of essential blood pressure and heart medications directly into the garbage disposal. She turned on the faucet and flipped the switch, grinding the vital pills into a useless powder. She was intentionally sabotaging Yvonne's medical regimen to manufacture a dangerous medical crisis, a crisis she would undoubtedly blame on my supposed neglect. I cut the engine of my car, stepped out onto the asphalt, and walked up my driveway with long, measured strides. I bypassed the front door entirely, utilizing the side entrance that opened directly into the kitchen. The heavy oak door swung open silently on its freshly oiled hinges just as Megan was eagerly reaching for the Wednesday pill compartment to continue her destruction. I stepped into the kitchen, a towering shadow blocking her only exit. Do not touch that, I commanded, my voice slicing through the quiet house like a cold steel blade. Megan gasped loudly, spinning around her hand, jerking back from the counter as if she had been physically burned. Hollis, she stammered, her eyes darting nervously toward her breast pocket, where the phone was still recording. I was just pouring Yvonne some water. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, radiating a lethal authority. You just ground $80 worth of prescribed beta blockers down my kitchen sink, Megan. I pointed directly at the smoke detector overhead. You are standing in front of a wide-angle lens that just captured you, committing felony tampering with a prescribed medical treatment. Hand over the spare key right now, or I will let the police retrieve it from you in handcuffs. Nate. The fake sweetness melted instantly from her face, replaced by a raw, visceral panic. The color drained completely from her cheeks as her eyes darted to the ceiling, realizing she had been thoroughly exposed. Her entire extortion plan evaporated in an instant. With trembling fingers, she dug into her designer purse and slapped the brass key onto the granite countertop. She backed away toward the front door, stumbling slightly over the edge of the expensive Persian rug. You are insane, Hollis, she hissed, her voice shaking with fear as she scrambled out the door and practically ran away. I locked the heavy deadbolt behind her, securing the perimeter, before walking over to Yvonne to assure her she was completely safe. I retrieved the brass key from the counter, dropping it into the trash where the pulverized pills remained. Just as I took a deep breath to steady my racing pulse, the heavy doorbell chimed. I expected to see Megan returning to hurl another useless insult, but the surveillance monitor displayed a stranger. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a thick, legal manila envelope standing rigidly on my porch, with an expression of professional detachment. I opened the door, bracing for whatever new foolishness my cowardly son had orchestrated. "Hollis Cole?" the man asked neutrally. I nodded slowly. He shoved the thick envelope against my chest. "You have been served." I tore it open. Corey had officially filed for an emergency conservatorship regarding Yvonne. I ripped the seal off the thick manila envelope the process server shoved into my chest and pulled out the legal petition. The bold black letters at the top of the page declared it an emergency filing. Corey had officially submitted a sworn affidavit requesting a full legal conservatorship over his own mother and me. The stiff legal parchment felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, practically vibrating with deceit. The quiet hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound in the foyer. Yvonne stepped out of the sunroom, her eyes silently asking a question she was too afraid to voice aloud. I held the pages up to the natural light streaming through the transom window, scanning the ridiculous legal jargon. Corey and his high-priced lawyers had drafted a masterpiece of fiction, weaving a narrative deliberately designed to strip away every right asset and ounce of dignity I had earned over a lifetime of hard work. I read the specific allegations aloud, my voice steady despite the sheer insanity of the words. The petitioner asserts that Hollis Cole exhibits advanced signs of paranoid dementia leading to severe behavioral instability. It went on to claim that I was actively isolating Yvonne from her loving family and violently withholding her necessary medical care. Corey had the absolute nerve to state under penalty of perjury that my sudden decision to freeze his credit cards was a clear symptom of cognitive decline rather than a highly rational response to his ongoing financial abuse. He painted himself as the deeply concerned, dutiful son, stepping up to seamlessly rescue his vulnerable parents from my deteriorating mental state. He was aggressively using the legal system as a crowbar to pry open my bank vaults. I did not panic. I did not throw the papers against the wall or shout into the empty hallway. A lesser man might have crumbled entirely under the threat of losing his basic autonomy, but panic is a luxury reserved for those who do not understand the mechanics of power. I lowered the document and looked at Yvonne, offering her a highly reassuring nod. Corey truly believed that throwing a thick stack of legal threats at an old man would paralyze him with fear. He fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. He thought I was just a retired contractor. The petition arrogantly demanded an immediate temporary freeze on all of my corporate and personal assets pending the preliminary hearing. Corey was actively trying to bleed me of liquid legal resources, ensuring I could not hire a proper defense team to fight the conservatorship. He wanted the courts to permanently lock me out of Horizon Commercial Holdings so he could casually step in as the court-appointed guardian and siphon the remaining accounts dry. It was a hostile takeover poorly disguised as a family medical intervention. He assumed that because I was nearly 70, I would simply roll over completely overwhelmed by the daunting legal machinery his expensive attorneys had set into motion. He was foolishly banking on my age, making me weak and compliant. Before I owned Horizon Commercial Holdings, I spent 2 long decades navigating the bloodthirsty waters of commercial real estate development in a city fundamentally designed to chew up minority contractors. I had sat at brutal negotiation tables with ruthless corporate sharks, corrupt city planners, and aggressive union bosses who aggressively tried to bankrupt me just for sport. I survived every single one of them by being colder, sharper, and infinitely more patient. My cowardly son, who literally cried when his country club membership was late, was an absolute amateur, entering a financial war zone he could not even begin to comprehend. I walked back into my study and placed the subpoena gently on my desk next to my coffee mug. I opened my encrypted laptop once again. If Corey wanted to play high-stakes financial hardball, I would gladly strip him of his armor entirely. I securely accessed the fleet management portal for Horizon Commercial Holdings. Corey currently drove a sleek silver Mercedes-Benz, a premium vehicle he proudly flaunted to his colleagues to project a powerful image of self-made wealth. He never once mentioned to anyone that the car was a corporate lease paid entirely by my company. I clicked the vehicle identification number on the screen. With 3 simple keystrokes, I formally revoked his authorization to operate the company vehicle, reporting the corporate lease as officially terminated and the asset ready for immediate repossession. I picked up my phone and directly dialed the dedicated line for the executive recovery firm my company contracted for delinquent commercial assets. The night dispatcher answered immediately. "I need a priority recovery executed tonight," I instructed, my voice crisp and commanding. "The vehicle is a silver Mercedes currently registered under Horizon Commercial Holdings. The authorized user has been terminated. I want the asset secured and towed to the impound lot immediately, absolutely no matter where it is currently parked." I gave them the precise GPS tracking coordinates associated with the onboard computer of the car. The dispatcher confirmed the order, promising a specialized team would be dispatched within the hour. I hung up the phone and smiled. Corey thought he could strip me of my dignity. I was going to strip him of his ride. The digital order was successfully sent, setting an unstoppable chain of events into motion. The power dynamic shifted the exact moment that recovery ticket hit the dispatch queue. Corey and Megan were currently running around the city, spending the fraudulent money they had illegally secured, playing the roles of wealthy elite victims. They had absolutely no idea that the solid ground beneath them was vanishing inch by inch. I closed the laptop, feeling a deep, highly satisfying calm wash over me. The company assets were totally secure, the legal paper trail was flawless, and the repossession team was already hunting their target. Across town, Corey and Megan were dining at a high-end steakhouse, celebrating what they mistakenly believed was a successful legal ambush. They sat right by the floor-to-ceiling front window, sipping wildly expensive wine to soothe their recently battered egos. Right in the middle of their appetizers, a heavy-duty tow truck backed up directly in front of the restaurant window. Corey watched in absolute horror as the burly operator expertly hooked up his pristine silver Mercedes, raising the front tires completely off the pavement. Diners pointed and whispered. Megan turned crimson with sheer, unbearable public humiliation. Mortified and severely backed into a corner, Megan angrily snatched her phone from the restaurant table. Refusing to accept this public defeat, she aggressively dialed the emergency hotline for Adult Protective Services. She was determined to send state agents to my door tonight. The heavy oak front door vibrated under a series of aggressive, rhythmic knocks that shattered the midnight silence. Bright red and blue emergency lights sliced through the gaps in my living room blinds, painting the dark walls with flashing urgency. They had actually sent the authorities to my house. I stood in the foyer, the cool hardwood floor grounding me as I glanced at the high-definition security monitor mounted on the wall. 2 state agents wearing official jackets bearing the Adult Protective Services insignia stood on my porch. A uniformed police officer flanked them, his hand resting casually near his duty belt. Out on the public sidewalk, standing safely beyond my property line, was Megan. She was violently shivering in the cool night air, clutching her expensive shawl, wiping away non-existent tears as she played the role of the terrified, deeply concerned family member. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open, projecting absolute unflinching calm. "Mr. Hollis Cole," the lead APS agent asked, flashing a badge with practiced authority. "We received an emergency hotline report of severe elder abuse and medical neglect occurring at this residence. We need to come inside immediately to assess the physical safety of your wife, Yvonne Cole." Megan shouted from the sidewalk, her voice cracking with theatrical desperation. "Please just make sure she is alive. He is completely out of his mind and locking her away from us." The police officer shifted his stance, clearly preparing for a hostile confrontation with a supposedly deranged, aggressive old man. I simply stepped aside, gesturing politely toward the illuminated hallway. "Gentlemen, please come in," I said evenly. "My wife is awake in the living room, and I would be more than happy to cooperate with your investigation." I watched them step into my meticulously clean, brightly lit home, noting the slight confusion flashing across their faces. They expected a chaotic scene, a disheveled house matching the horrific narrative Megan had undoubtedly painted on the phone. Instead, they found a pristine environment smelling of lavender and floor wax. I did not raise my voice or act defensive. When you understand the absolute power of documentation, you never need to shout to prove your innocence. Megan wanted a messy, traumatic extraction to bolster her conservatorship claim, but I was about to dismantle her entire act with surgical precision. The agents walked into the living room where Yvonne sat comfortably on the plush sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket and watching a late-night documentary. The lead agent approached her cautiously, using a soft, patronizing tone reserved for the severely cognitively impaired. "Mrs. Cole, do you know what year it is?" he asked gently. "Do you feel safe in this house right now?" Yvonne looked at him sharply, her intellect completely unclouded. It is the current year, officer, and the only thing making me feel unsafe is being interrogated in my own living room at midnight. Megan crept up to the open doorway, her voice echoing into the house. Yvonne, do not let him intimidate you. Tell them how he throws away your medicine. Tell them how you are trapped. Megan had severely miscalculated the intelligence of the agents standing in my living room. When Yvonne survived a severe bout of pneumonia 15 years ago, I promised myself I would never leave her health to chance. I built a comprehensive digitized medical filing system long before the local hospitals adopted the technology. Every single doctor visit, prescription refill, and specialist evaluation was cataloged, indexed, and updated weekly in a master binder I kept in my study. I managed her healthcare with the exact same ruthless, uncompromising efficiency I used to manage multi-million-dollar commercial construction sites. Megan thought she could fabricate a medical crisis completely unaware of the fortress I had built around Yvonne. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up a thick leather-bound binder, dropping it firmly in front of the lead APS agent. Open it, I commanded, my tone shifting from polite host to an undisputed authority. You will find my wife's complete medical history, including stamped affidavits from her primary care physician dated just this morning confirming her perfect cognitive health. The agent opened the binder, his eyes widening at the meticulous color-coded tabs, the recent urgent care report documenting her bruised wrist, and the pharmaceutical receipts. While he reviewed the undeniable proof of her excellent care, I picked up a remote control and aimed it at the large flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. I switched the input to my private surveillance server. I have something much more important to show you regarding the disposal of my wife's necessary medication. The television screen flickered instantly, displaying the crystal-clear, high-definition footage captured earlier that afternoon. The agents watched in absolute silence as the video showed Megan sneaking into my kitchen, snatching Yvonne's pill organizer, and actively grinding $80 worth of prescribed beta blockers down my garbage disposal. The woman standing on my sidewalk crying about elder abuse is the exact same woman actively attempting to orchestrate a lethal medical emergency. I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the walls. Furthermore, she and my son just forged my wife's signature to secure a $50,000 unsecured personal loan, which is currently an active federal wire fraud investigation. I handed the police officer the printed fraud reports provided by Aaron Mitchell. I am not a threat to my wife. The woman standing outside is an active documented threat to our financial and physical survival. The dynamic in the room inverted entirely. The APS agent stared at the footage playing on a loop, the irrefutable visual evidence of a premeditated felony committed by the very person who called the hotline. The police officer reviewed the forgery documents, his jaw tightening in sheer disgust as he realized they had been deliberately weaponized by a malicious caller. Megan, still hovering near the open front door, realized the horrific mistake she had made. The fake tears dried up instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost caught in a spotlight. The lead APS agent slammed the medical binder shut and turned sharply toward the front door, his previous gentle demeanor completely gone. He marched out onto the porch, pointing a stern finger directly at Megan. Ma'am, filing a false report of elder abuse to manipulate state resources is a serious criminal offense, he barked aggressively. Coupling that with video evidence of you intentionally destroying life-saving prescription medication upgrades this to a felony endangerment charge. We will be opening a formal investigation, and this officer will be submitting a police report regarding your actions here tonight. Do not move. Megan did not stay to argue. Panicking wildly as the police officer reached for his radio, she sprinted down the driveway, completely abandoning her designer high heels on the pavement. She threw herself into a waiting rideshare, speeding away into the dark as her entire life finally imploded. The phone illuminated my dark study at exactly 1 a.m, vibrating relentlessly against the mahogany desk. I did not even have to look at the caller identification to know Corey had finally realized the immense depth of the legal grave he had dug for himself. The house was entirely silent again. The flashing police lights had long since vanished into the night, taking the absurd drama of the Adult Protective Services investigation with them. Yvonne was asleep upstairs, completely exhausted by the emotional toll of the evening. I sat in my leather chair, staring at the discarded designer high heels Megan had abandoned on my driveway, which were visible through the security monitor. The flashing phone demanded an answer, a desperate plea from a son who was currently drowning in the consequences of his own arrogance. I answered the call without saying a single word. Dad, listen to me. We can fix this right now, Corey shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic and breathless exhaustion. The tow company refuses to release my car, and Megan just came back to the motel completely hysterical, claiming the police are trying to charge her with a felony. You need to call them off immediately. If you return the Mercedes and unfreeze our secondary accounts, I will officially withdraw the conservatorship petition first thing in the morning. We can just pretend this massive misunderstanding never happened. We will even stay away from the house for a while to let things cool down. He was actually trying to bargain with me. He was standing in the middle of a blazing inferno that he had intentionally ignited, and he was offering to put down his matches only if I bought him a brand new fire truck. He thought he possessed leverage. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes and listening to his erratic, heavy breathing over the cellular connection. He possessed absolutely zero self-awareness, completely blinded by the illusion of control. He genuinely believed that the legal system was a simple negotiation tactic, a trivial game of leverage he could turn on and off whenever things became slightly inconvenient. He did not understand that federal fraud investigations and felony endangerment charges do not simply vanish because a spoiled vice president decides he is tired of fighting. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to stew in the awkward, heavy realization that his pathetic offers held zero value to me. I do not negotiate with criminals, Corey, I replied, my voice carrying the freezing weight of absolute finality. Your car belongs to my corporation, and your conservatorship is a fraudulent joke that my lawyers will crush before noon. You have exhausted my patience and destroyed my trust. I am giving you one single, non-negotiable ultimatum. You will divorce Megan immediately, and you will march into the Federal Fraud Division tomorrow morning to fully confess your role in forging your mother's signature for that $50,000 loan. If you surrender and cooperate with the authorities, I will hire a competent defense attorney to keep your prison sentence to a strict minimum. I will make sure you do not get completely ruined by the system. If you refuse, I will personally hand the prosecutors every shred of evidence they need to bury you both. Decades ago, I watched a 16-year-old Corey smash a brand new sports car into a neighbor's brick wall because he was showing off for his prep school friends. Instead of making him work a summer job to pay for the extensive damages, I silently wrote a massive check to the neighbor and bought Corey a replacement vehicle to spare him the social embarrassment. I thought I was providing him the soft, privileged life that racism and poverty had violently denied me. I realize now that my overprotective wealth did not build a strong man. It actively engineered a coward who instinctively runs from every single mistake he makes. Are you actually threatening me with prison? Corey spat back his fear, instantly mutating into a defensive, venomous arrogance. You're supposed to protect your family, Dad. You cannot just abandon your own son because you are having a petty power trip over some financial documents. I am not going to divorce my wife, and I am certainly not going to confess to a crime that you could easily pay off with pocket change. We just needed a temporary cash flow to keep our investment secure. You think you hold all the cards just because you control the bank accounts and the real estate properties. You think you are completely untouchable because you sit in a fancy office, but you have a public reputation to maintain in this city. If I go down, I am taking your precious corporate empire down with me. You will do no such thing, I stated calmly, entirely unfazed by a desperate boy throwing a ridiculous tantrum. But Corey was already accelerating into total delusion, grasping at any straw to save his collapsing reality. I know journalists, Dad. I know financial bloggers who would absolutely love a juicy story about how Horizon Commercial Holdings was built on massive tax evasion and illegal zoning kickbacks. I will tell them you have been intentionally cooking the books for over a decade to secure federal contracts. The local commercial real estate market will completely blacklist you. Your board of directors will force you into an early retirement before the week is over. Give me my car and my accounts back right now, or I will destroy your entire legacy and drag your good name through the absolute mud. You owe me this much. I felt no fear, no anxiety, not even a trace of genuine anger. I only felt a profound, suffocating pity for the foolish stranger on the other end of the line. Blackmail and extortion are additional federal offenses, Corey said with surgical precision. I highly suggest you stop speaking before you completely obliterate any chance of securing a lenient plea deal. You cannot destroy a foundation built on solid rock by throwing handfuls of mud. You made your choice. I ended the call and blocked his number entirely. The final tether between us was officially cut. I sat in the darkness of my study watching the illuminated digital clock on my desk turn to exactly 2 a.m. The house was completely quiet, wrapped in the deep stillness that only occurs in the dead of night. I reviewed the security feeds on my monitor, confirming that the perimeter was secure and the street was totally empty. I was just about to close my encrypted laptop and head upstairs to finally rest when a sudden violent crash echoed through the ground floor. The deafening sound of shattering glass tore through the silence, vibrating against the hardwood floors. I did not flinch. I silently reached under my desk and triggered the secondary lockdown protocol. On the surveillance monitor, I watched a heavy-set man wearing a dark ski mask step carefully through the shattered remnants of my home office window. Megan had actually hired a thug to break in. The masked intruder stepped heavily onto the carpet, his heavy boots crunching the shards of window glass into the expensive fibers. He did not bother to check for motion sensors or infrared beams, completely oblivious to the silent alarms already triggering across my multi-tiered security grid. From the pitch-black confines of my secondary study across the hall, I watched his every movement on my illuminated tablet. The man breathed heavily, a wet, rasping sound that echoed in the dark space. He swept a small, cheap flashlight across the mahogany bookshelves and the leather seating, entirely missing the high-definition lenses tracking him from the crown molding. He moved with a clumsy, desperate urgency, clearly hired on a tight budget. Megan had obviously contracted a bottom-tier street criminal, someone cheap enough to afford with whatever cash she had managed to scrounge from her dwindling reserves. The intruder ignored the expensive electronics, the silver paperweights, and the locked steel filing cabinets. He moved directly toward the center of the room, shining his beam onto the large oak desk. He swept past my encrypted laptop and honed in on the exact item he was hired to extract. A thick, bright red folder sitting perfectly aligned with the edge of the leather desk pad. He snatched it up rapidly, stuffing it roughly into his dark jacket. I watched as he glanced out the shattered window, verifying the street was still clear before hoisting himself back over the sill. He did not realize how incredibly easy I had made it for him to bypass the perimeter. He was a disposable pawn executing a flawless extraction of a completely rigged prize. I remained seated in the dark, my finger resting lightly over the remote panic button that would instantly drop heavy steel shutters over every exit point. I did not press it. I intentionally wanted the red folder to leave the premises. If I trapped him here, the police would simply arrest a low-level burglar and Megan would completely deny any involvement. By allowing the physical asset to be successfully stolen, I was handing my daughter-in-law enough rope to hang herself permanently. She wanted leverage, so I gave her a perfectly packaged illusion of total control. Megan truly believed she was a criminal mastermind outsmarting a retired old man who forgot to lock his windows. She assumed that securing the physical documents would magically transfer ownership of a multi-million-dollar commercial empire into her hands. The sheer arrogance required to orchestrate a burglary on the home of the very man you just accused of dementia is staggering. She desperately needed liquid capital to hire expensive lawyers, flee the city, or bribe her way out of the impending federal wire fraud charges my attorneys had just filed. She thought that red folder contained the master deeds to Horizon Commercial Holdings and the routing numbers for my offshore trust funds. She was betting her entire freedom on the contents of those stolen pages, completely unaware of the lethal game she was playing. Back in the late 90s, when my construction firm first started winning massive government bids, rival developers frequently tried to infiltrate my offices to steal my pricing models. To combat the corporate espionage, I developed a strategy of planting bait documents. I would leave fake financial ledgers and altered architectural blueprints on my desk, intentionally printed on specialized paper embedded with micro watermarks. The rivals would steal the fake plans, underbid me using flawed math, and bankrupt themselves during the construction phase. I had simply dusted off my oldest, most effective corporate trap for a brand new parasite. The red folder did not contain actual deeds. It contained meticulously forged replicas of property titles for my most valuable commercial spaces alongside a completely fabricated trust fund portfolio. Every single page was printed on trackable, chemically treated paper. More importantly, the documents listed a specific shell company as the holding entity, an entity that I had deliberately dissolved over a decade ago. It looked incredibly official to the untrained eye, brimming with legal jargon and notary seals that I had legally voided years prior. I had planted the folder on my desk 3 hours ago, anticipating that a desperate rat would eventually try to raid the pantry. I watched the thug disappear down the street on my monitors, carrying a ticking financial time bomb straight back to his desperate employer. Across town, Megan sat nervously in the passenger seat of a rented sedan parked under the flickering lights of a deserted strip mall. My surveillance team tracked the meetup. The thug approached her window, tossing the red folder into her lap before demanding his cash payment. She handed him an envelope of crumpled bills, her eyes gleaming with manic triumph as she eagerly flipped open the stolen file. She scanned the official-looking documents, tracing her manicured fingers over the bold headings declaring millions of dollars in untethered assets. She smiled, fully convinced she had just acquired the ultimate financial leverage. She thought she had completely cornered me. She thought she now possessed the collateral required to secure a massive, untraceable loan to fund her defense and escape her impending federal arrest. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that presenting those documents to any legitimate financial institution would immediately trigger a massive fraud alert. Legitimate banks relentlessly verify titles with county clerks and state databases. But Megan was not planning to go to a legitimate bank. She had no credit, no car, and a husband who was currently useless to her. She needed cash immediately, absolutely no questions asked. The only places that accept physical deeds for instant six-figure cash payouts without lengthy underwriting processes are the absolute darkest corners of the underground financial sector. She was walking right into my trap. The sun was just beginning to rise when Megan pulled her rental car into a severely blighted industrial district on the south side of the city. The buildings here were covered in graffiti, their windows secured with thick iron bars. She stepped out, clutching my red folder tightly against her chest, her expensive clothing clashing violently with the broken glass and trash littering the pavement. She walked toward a heavily fortified door marked only with a faded neon sign advertising rapid title loans. She was stepping into the territory of hard money lenders, the kind of men who do not use courts to settle their disputes. She walked through the heavy steel door, fully intending to leverage my fake commercial deeds to secure $100,000 in untraceable cash. She believed she was finally winning the war. She had no idea she was handing a violent cartel a worthless stack of paper. The heavy steel door closed behind Megan, the metallic clank signaling the completion of her desperate gamble. She stepped back out onto the cracked pavement of the industrial district, clutching a cheap canvas duffel bag packed tightly with $100,000 in unmarked, untraceable cash. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of pure adrenaline and perceived victory. She did not care about the exorbitant interest rates buried in the fine print of the hard money contract, nor did she consider the violent reputation of the men sitting inside that windowless office. She only cared that she had secured the necessary capital to hire the most aggressive, ruthless defense attorney in the city, to crush my legal resistance and finalize the conservatorship over Yvonne and me. Within 2 hours, Megan had deposited the cash into a newly opened secondary account and retained the services of a high-profile litigator known for utterly destroying families in probate court. She returned to the cheap motel room where Corey was anxiously pacing, slamming the retainer agreement onto the stained laminate desk with a triumphant smirk. The new attorney immediately filed a motion for an expedited preliminary hearing, aggressively pushing to grant Corey temporary guardianship. Megan believed she had finally outmaneuvered me, leveraging what she thought was my own commercial empire to fund my absolute destruction. She was completely intoxicated by the illusion of supreme control. She did not realize that while she was busy playing corporate raider with counterfeit documents, I was actively arming my legal executioner. Aaron Mitchell sat in his pristine downtown office, systematically organizing the devastating arsenal of evidence we had meticulously gathered over the past 48 hours. He did not file a standard response to the conservatorship petition. He drafted a lethal, comprehensive motion to dismiss designed specifically to humiliate Corey's legal team and completely obliterate the fraudulent narrative they had constructed. Aaron moved with the cold, calculated precision of a predator closing in on a severely wounded target. Aaron formally submitted the motion to the probate judge, attaching the undeniable proof of Yvonne's perfect cognitive health and the certified medical documentation of the physical assault she suffered at Megan's hands. He included the official Adult Protective Services report detailing the incident where Megan had intentionally filed a false emergency claim to manipulate state resources. The centerpiece of the motion, however, was the high-definition security footage clearly showing Megan actively destroying Yvonne's prescribed blood pressure medication. Aaron masterfully framed the entire conservatorship petition not as a misguided family intervention, but as a malicious, calculated extortion attempt orchestrated by two individuals currently under active federal investigation for wire fraud. Corey's high-priced litigator walked into the preliminary hearing expecting to easily steamroll an overwhelmed, defenseless old man. Instead, he walked directly into an absolute legal slaughterhouse. The judge, A seasoned veteran with zero tolerance for elder exploitation reviewed Aaron's meticulously prepared motion to dismiss. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating as the judge's eyes scanned the undeniable evidence of physical violence, medical sabotage, and federal forgery. Corey sat frozen at the petitioner's table, the color rapidly draining from his face as he realized his expensive attorney was completely paralyzed by the overwhelming counterattack. The judge slammed the thick file onto his desk, his expression twisting into sheer disgust. He did not mince his words, directing his fury entirely at Corey. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a conservatorship petition filed with such blatant, malicious intent. The judge declared, his voice echoing sharply across the quiet courtroom. To utilize this court as a weapon to facilitate financial exploitation while actively endangering the life of a vulnerable adult is an absolute disgrace. The judge formally threw out Corey's entire case with prejudice, ensuring it could never be filed again. But the judge was not finished. He turned his attention to the official APS report detailing the midnight ambush at my home. Filing a false report of elder abuse is a severe manipulation of state resources. He continued, his tone turning deadly. I am formally recommending that the district attorney review this file for immediate criminal charges regarding the false APS report and the documented medical sabotage. You are extremely fortunate you are leaving this courtroom without handcuffs today, Mr. Cole. The gavel struck the block with a deafening crack, finalizing their absolute humiliating defeat. Corey and Megan stumbled out of the courthouse completely shattered, having exhausted their stolen funds on a catastrophic legal failure. They retreated to their miserable motel room, utterly silent, the crushing reality of their situation finally breaking through their arrogance. The conservatorship was dead. The federal fraud investigation was active. The eviction was finalized. They had absolutely nothing left to leverage. Just as the suffocating despair settled over them, Corey's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the voice on the other end was cold, grating, and incredibly dangerous. The hard money lenders had attempted to register a secondary lien using the red folder Megan had provided. Their internal appraisers had quickly discovered the specialized watermark I had embedded in the paper. They knew the deed was a complete, calculated fake. We do not appreciate being handed fraudulent documents, the gravelly voice warned, stripping away any pretense of a standard business transaction. You have exactly 48 hours to deliver $150,000 in cash to cover the principal and our extreme inconvenience. If you miss that deadline, we will not be using lawyers to collect our debt. The line went dead, leaving Corey holding the phone in sheer, unadulterated terror. The heavy pounding on the penthouse door did not belong to a room service waiter delivering a complimentary breakfast. It was exactly 6 a.m, and the county sheriff had arrived with a court-ordered mandate to physically remove Corey and Megan from the premises. Time was officially up. 2 uniformed deputies stood in the hallway, their hands resting near their duty belts, while a team of 4 burly movers waited impatiently behind them, holding heavy dollies. Corey opened the door, wearing a wrinkled silk robe, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night of sheer terror following the phone call from the underground lenders. The lead deputy stepped forward, holding up a clipboard with the finalized eviction notice prominently displayed. The grace period had expired at midnight, and the management company had authorized an immediate forced extraction of all occupants and their remaining personal belongings. "You cannot do this right now," Corey pleaded, blocking the doorway with his arm as if his frail stance could halt the machinery of the law. "My lawyers are filing an emergency stay of execution. We just need a few more days to pack our valuables." The sheriff shook his head, completely unfazed by the pathetic stalling tactic. "There is no stay of execution on file, sir," the deputy replied sharply. "You were given a legal 30-day notice which you ignored. Step aside immediately or you will be placed under arrest for criminal trespassing." Megan emerged from the master bedroom clutching a designer handbag, her face pale with shock. Corey stepped back defeated as the movers flooded the pristine apartment. Within minutes, custom Italian leather sofas, expensive modern art, and fragile glass coffee tables were violently dismantled and hauled directly down to the public sidewalk, piled up like common garbage for the entire city to see. I watched the entire eviction process unfold in real time through the building's high-definition security cameras from the comfort of my home office. Corey had always believed that living in a glass tower elevated him above the consequences of his actions. He assumed his zip code granted him immunity from the harsh realities of the world. Watching his overpriced furniture being unceremoniously dumped onto the dirty pavement was a necessary brutal lesson in humility. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of luxury, and I was systematically stripping that illusion away down to the bare studs. Leaving Megan stranded on the sidewalk to guard their pile of exposed belongings, Corey desperately hailed a cab to his corporate office. He still believed he could salvage his professional life, hoping to secure an emergency advance on his quarterly bonus to appease the violent lenders currently hunting him. He straightened his expensive tie, practically sprinting through the revolving glass doors of his firm, desperate to project the image of a successful executive. But as he stepped into the expansive marble lobby, his frantic pace halted instantly. Standing near the reception desk were two massive, heavily tattooed men wearing ill-fitting suits that barely concealed the bulky outlines of concealed weapons. They were not corporate clients. They were the collectors sent by the hard money lenders to ensure Corey understood the absolute gravity of his $150,000 debt. Corey had always been dangerously obsessed with the superficial optics of corporate success rather than the actual substance of hard work. When he was 22, I offered him a rigorous paid internship at my construction firm to teach him the fundamental mechanics of business. He quit after 3 days, claiming the dirt and sweat ruined his image. He chose to chase empty prestige in corporate sales, building a fragile career entirely dependent on networking expensive suits and a polished facade. He valued the appearance of wealth far more than the discipline required to actually generate it. The two thugs spotted Corey immediately, stepping deliberately into his path and blocking his access to the secure elevators. "We are not leaving until we get our money," the larger man growled quietly, his voice carrying a lethal, unmistakable threat. Before Corey could even attempt to stammer out another pathetic excuse, the glass doors of the executive suite opened. The senior managing partner of the firm strode into the lobby, flanked by 2 armed building security guards. The partner glared at Corey, taking in the sight of the intimidating debt collectors and the sheer panic radiating from his vice president. The corporate firm had already been notified by federal agents regarding the ongoing wire fraud investigation tied to Corey's name, and this public spectacle was the final unforgivable breach of company protocol. "Mr. Cole," the managing partner announced, his voice echoing sharply across the silent marble lobby, "your employment at this firm is terminated effectively immediately." Corey's jaw dropped, his hands shaking wildly. "You cannot fire me," he stammered defensively. "I am your top earner in the commercial division." The partner sneered in absolute disgust. "You are the subject of an active federal fraud investigation, and you have brought violent criminal elements directly into my corporate lobby," the partner countered firmly. "Security has already packed your personal belongings into a cardboard box. Hand over your company badge, surrender your access keys, and leave this building right now before I have you arrested for trespassing." The thug smirked, clearly enjoying the devastating public execution of Corey's entire professional identity. The remaining color completely drained from Corey's face. In less than 3 hours, he had lost his luxury home, his high-paying career, and whatever tiny shred of social standing he still possessed. He was utterly bankrupt, professionally ruined, and actively hunted by ruthless underground criminals. He handed over his key card with trembling fingers, taking the pathetic cardboard box containing his desk items from the security guard. He stumbled out of the revolving doors, walking aimlessly down the busy city street, a completely broken man who had finally crashed into the crushing reality of his own catastrophic failures. Across town, Megan was sitting on the edge of a stained mattress in a cheap roadside motel, having abandoned their dumped furniture the moment it started to rain. She was backed into a lethal corner, fully aware that federal agents were building a case and the cartel lenders were closing in. Her arrogance had finally mutated into a toxic, volatile form of pure desperation. She refused to accept defeat. Pacing the tiny, foul-smelling room, she pulled her smartphone from her pocket, her eyes locking onto a specific document she had managed to photograph weeks ago. It was the routing information for Yvonne's primary retirement fund. Megan cleared her throat, rehearsing a softer, older vocal tone. She dialed the toll-free banking number, executing a final, completely insane gamble to wire out the entire life savings by impersonating her own mother-in-law over the phone. Megan cleared her throat intentionally, dropping the pitch of her voice by an octave to mimic the slight melodic rasp of a woman 30 years her senior. She gripped her smartphone with white knuckles, pressing the device tightly against her ear as the automated banking prompt connected to a representative. The foul-smelling motel room was suffocatingly small, wallpapered in nicotine stains and desperation. Corey paced the worn carpet behind her, biting his fingernails down to the quick, his tailored suit completely ruined by sweat and terror. Megan ignored his pathetic whimpering, her eyes locked intensely on the digital photograph of Yvonne's retirement portfolio she had secretly snapped months ago. The customer service representative greeted her, asking for the primary account holder's name. Megan answered smoothly, channeling Yvonne's polite cadence with a chilling, sociopathic ease that demonstrated just how long she had been rehearsing this exact financial execution. "Yes, this is Yvonne Cole," Megan lied effortlessly, her voice dripping with fabricated sweetness. "I need to authorize an emergency wire transfer to a secondary account to cover some unexpected medical expenses." The representative politely asked for the standard security verifications. Megan read the mother's maiden name, the childhood street, and the social security digits flawlessly from her stolen notes. "Excellent, Mrs. Cole," the representative replied cheerfully. "And for the final verification step, can you confirm the exact date and location of your honeymoon?" Megan did not even blink. "June 14th, 1977, in Charleston, South Carolina," she answered, securing total access to an account containing over $800,000. She looked up at Corey and flashed a predatory, triumphant smile. She actually believed she had just outsmarted the entire banking system with a simple, untraceable phone call today. Sitting inside Aaron Mitchell's immaculate downtown law office, I watched a blinking green light illuminate the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the mahogany wall. I was not panicking. I did not feel a single ounce of fear regarding the security of my wife's life savings. Aaron sat across from me, his hands steepled under his chin, projecting the absolute calm of a man watching a predictable chess match. Beside him sat Special Agent Reynolds from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Wire Fraud Division, his heavy headphones clamped tightly over his ears, actively monitoring the live ongoing intercept. "We have positive voice identification on the target," Agent Reynolds stated flatly, tapping a few keys on his encrypted terminal. "She is officially initiating a high-volume interstate wire transfer across state lines using stolen credentials. The crime has officially escalated from attempted theft to a Tier 1 federal felony." Over the secure audio feed, we listened as Megan confidently rattled off the routing numbers for the offshore shell account she had quickly established that morning. She was requesting an immediate, unencumbered transfer of $500,000. She wanted enough capital to pay off the violent cartel lenders, hire a ruthless defense attorney, and permanently flee the jurisdiction. The sheer audacity of her greed was staggering, but her total lack of technical understanding was going to be her absolute devastating legal undoing today. Back in the early 2000s, my commercial construction firm was targeted by an aggressive offshore phishing syndicate attempting to drain our massive payroll accounts. Instead of relying on standard banking firewalls, I contracted former intelligence contractors to build a custom honeypot protocol. It was a decoy digital vault designed to look incredibly vulnerable while secretly acting as a steel trap for digital intruders. I applied that exact same military-grade architecture to all of Yvonne's primary retirement portfolios the very day Corey married Megan. I knew her supreme entitlement would eventually lead her to try and rob us entirely. The bank representative on the phone, who was actually a trained federal operative working in tandem with Agent Reynolds, cheerfully confirmed the transaction details. "The transfer of $500,000 is processing now, Mrs. Cole," the operative stated smoothly. "The funds should reflect in your receiving account within the next few minutes. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" Megan let out a shaky breath of profound relief. "No, thank you. You have been wonderfully helpful," she replied, maintaining her fake elderly persona, right up until she abruptly ended the call. Agent Reynolds immediately locked his keyboard, signaling the successful completion of the intercept. The digital trace is verified, the IP address is pinned to a motel on the south side, and the voice print analysis is an absolute, undeniably perfect match to Megan Cole, he confirmed to us. On the surface, the banking interface reflected a massive withdrawal, making it appear as though $500,000 had successfully left Yvonne's portfolio. In reality, the money never actually touched the public banking grid. The moment Megan provided her fraudulent offshore routing number, my automated honeypot protocol intervened seamlessly, hijacking the digital pathway. The funds were instantly diverted and locked inside a heavily encrypted frozen federal holding account entirely controlled by the United States government. The money was completely safe, entirely out of her reach, and actively serving as the primary physical evidence for her impending federal indictment. I leaned back in my leather chair, a cold, satisfied smile crossing my face as Aaron slowly closed his legal binder. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely, ruthlessly crushed her entire criminal operation. Inside the filthy motel room, Megan tossed the smartphone onto the stained mattress and let out a loud, victorious scream. "We did it!" she yelled, throwing her arms around a completely stunned Corey. "We actually did it. The money is on the way." Corey collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his trembling hands, weeping tears of absolute relief. He truly believed they had successfully paid off their catastrophic debts and secured their total freedom. They were blindly celebrating a massive financial victory that was in harsh reality their finalized, undeniable legal death sentence. Megan eagerly grabbed her phone, refreshing the banking application every 10 seconds, waiting for the digital confirmation text to arrive from her offshore shell account. The suffocating anxiety that had plagued them for days transformed into a toxic, arrogant euphoria. They started discussing flight paths, debating which tropical country possessed the most lenient extradition treaties for American citizens. The minutes dragged on the cheap plastic clock on the nightstand, ticking loudly in the stifling room. Megan frowned, hitting the refresh button again, her initial celebration slowly beginning to curdle into a creeping, icy dread as the screen remained entirely empty. Before she could vocalize her rising panic, the confirmation they were waiting for finally arrived. But it was not a text message. It was 3 heavy, synchronized, bone-rattling knocks, striking the flimsy wooden door of the motel room, echoing incredibly loudly with the undeniable force of federal authority. The flimsy motel door exploded inward with a deafening, splintering crash that tore the deadbolt straight through the cheap wooden frame. A heavily armed tactical team of federal agents flooded the cramped, nicotine-stained room, their tactical flashlights cutting violently through the stale, suffocating air like blinding white lasers. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Get on the ground right now." The commanding roar of the lead agent completely paralyzed Corey and Megan. Heavily armored bodies swarmed the tiny space weapons drawn and leveled directly at my son and his wife. The sheer kinetic force of the raid sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Corey stumbled backward, his knees giving out instantly as he collapsed onto the stained carpet in absolute shock. Megan shrieked, dropping her smartphone as a federal agent grabbed her wrist, violently twisting her arms behind her back to secure the heavy steel handcuffs. "Do not move," the lead agent barked, pressing his knee firmly between Corey's shoulder blades as he secured the restraints. "You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation." Megan writhed against the mattress, her designer clothes rubbing against the filthy floor. "This is a mistake," she screamed hysterically, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of its usual arrogant polish. "You have the wrong people. We did not steal anything." The agent hauled her roughly to her feet, completely ignoring her pathetic protests. "The bank transfer intercept confirms your voice print, Mrs. Cole," he stated with lethal professional detachment. "You are caught dead to rights." Corey remained face down on the carpet, hyperventilating wildly, completely unable to process the absolute devastating reality of his immediate federal incarceration. Sitting comfortably in Aaron Mitchell's downtown office, I listened to the entire tactical raid unfold in real time through Agent Reynolds' secure audio feed. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or paternal remorse. When a man actively chooses to align himself with a parasite, he must inevitably share its fate when the exterminator arrives. Corey had arrogantly assumed that white-collar crime was merely a game of paperwork and stern warnings. He had absolutely no idea what raw, unadulterated state power felt like, until it was actively crushing his spine against a filthy motel floor. As the federal agents began hauling them toward the door, Megan abruptly shifted her survival strategy. Realizing that arrogant denial would not save her from federal prison, she instantly activated her ultimate defense mechanism. She began sobbing violently, forcing heavy, fabricated tears down her cheeks. "Please, you have to listen to me," she wailed, her voice trembling with a perfectly engineered vulnerability. "I did not want to do this. He forced me." She turned her head, pointing her cuffed hands directly at Corey, who was currently being dragged to his feet by 2 agents. "My husband made me make that phone call. He controls all our money. He threatened to hurt me if I did not help him steal from his parents. I am just a victim here. Please, you have to protect me from him." Megan came from a long, generational line of affluent, privileged families who fundamentally believed that accountability was a burden reserved strictly for the lower classes. She possessed a terrifying sociopathic ability to instantly weaponize her tears, retreating into the historical safety of being a fragile, manipulated white woman entirely at the mercy of a controlling husband. She had used this exact same crying tactic to escape a severe drunk driving charge 5 years ago, leaving her naive college roommate to take the fall. She fully expected the federal agents to automatically pity her and blindly accept her fabricated narrative. Corey stared at his wife, his bloodshot eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as her vicious lies echoed in the cramped motel room. The man who had sold out his own parents, who had actively participated in a plot to declare his father legally insane just to appease this woman, was finally witnessing the absolute depths of her depravity. "Megan, what are you doing?" He choked out his voice, a pathetic broken rasp. "You planned all of this. It was your idea to call the bank." Megan did not even look at him. She kept her tear-filled eyes locked onto the lead federal agent, shaking her head as if Corey's words were physical blows. "He is lying," she sobbed, projecting an Oscar-worthy performance of profound trauma. "He has been manipulating me for years. He is a monster." The lead agent remained entirely unimpressed by her theatrical display. "Save it for your public defender, ma'am," he replied coldly, shoving her toward the motel exit. "We have high-definition video of you actively destroying prescription medication, and we have the clean audio file of you happily bragging about this wire fraud attempt 5 minutes ago. Nobody forced you to do a single thing." Corey was dragged out of the room right behind her, his entire world completely shattered. He had sacrificed his dignity, his lucrative career, his luxury home, and his family for a woman who did not hesitate to throw him directly into the incinerator the very second she smelled smoke. The absolute betrayal carved a hollow, permanent void directly into his chest. They were tossed into separate federal transport vehicles, completely isolated in their impending ruin. The illusion of their unified power couple facade was permanently obliterated. Megan had brutally proven that her loyalty extended only as far as her own immediate survival, completely willing to hand Corey a maximum federal sentence if it meant shaving a single month off her own time. The audio feed cut out as Agent Reynolds disconnected from the tactical channel, giving me a firm, respectful nod. "The arrest warrants were successfully executed, Mr. Cole," he confirmed quietly. "They are currently being processed at the downtown federal holding facility. They have absolutely nothing left." 4 agonizing hours later, Corey sat on a cold steel bench inside a sterile concrete holding cell. He had been stripped of his tailored suit, his designer watch, and his corporate arrogance, currently wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and despair. He was no longer a vice president. He was federal inmate number 4087. A guard approached the heavy iron bars, tossing a cheap plastic telephone through the narrow food slot. "You get 1 call," the guard muttered. "Make it count." Corey picked up the receiver with severely trembling hands. He had no high-powered lawyers, no wealthy friends, and a wife who was actively trying to frame him for a federal felony. Desperate, terrified, and completely broken, Corey dialed the only number he had memorized. My private cell phone rang. I answered it, waiting for him to speak. "Dad, please," Corey wept hysterically into the receiver. "I need bail money. You have to save me, Dave." The heavy steel doors of the federal detention center slammed shut behind me with a resounding metallic clank. I did not wear a suit, opting instead for a simple dark sweater and slacks, refusing to offer this miserable place any unnecessary respect. I walked directly to the visitation block. The visitation room smelled aggressively of cheap industrial bleach and stale sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pale yellow hue across the scarred linoleum floor. I sat down on the bolted metal stool, staring straight ahead through the thick, smudged, bulletproof glass. On the other side, Corey was escorted into the booth by a bored corrections officer. My son looked completely decimated. The bright orange jumpsuit swallowed his previously tailored frame. His shoulders hunched, his hair a disheveled mess. He picked up the heavy black receiver with severely trembling hands, looking at me with bloodshot, terrified eyes. "Dad, thank God you came!" Corey gasped into the receiver, his voice cracking with unfiltered desperation. The audio fed through the thick glass with a harsh, static delay. "You have to get me out of here today. This place is an absolute nightmare. The guards are treating me like an actual criminal. I need you to post the bail money right now. I will pay you back every single cent once we clear this ridiculous misunderstanding up." My lawyers can easily fix this if I can just get out of this cell and talk to the right people. I stared at him, my expression a solid wall of granite. I did not pick up my receiver immediately. I let him ramble, letting the sheer absurdity of his demands bounce off the reinforced glass. He still believed his father's checkbook was a magical eraser for federal felonies. I slowly lifted the black plastic phone to my ear, studying the broken man sitting across from me. He possessed absolutely zero comprehension of the legal hurricane currently shredding his life to pieces. He was not asking for forgiveness or demonstrating a single ounce of genuine remorse for the extreme violence and fraud he had inflicted upon his own mother. He was merely experiencing the uncomfortable physical friction of consequence for the very first time in his sheltered life. He thought he was enduring a temporary inconvenience, completely blind to the fact that his old life was permanently dead. "Dad, please say something," Corey begged, pressing his sweaty palm against the thick glass separating us. "It was all Megan. She went completely crazy. She manipulated the bank records and made that phone call entirely on her own. I was just in the room. You have to tell the federal agents that I had absolutely nothing to do with the wire fraud. You know the judges in this city. You have the political connections to make this quietly disappear. Just write the bail check so I can go home and figure out how to handle the divorce." He was shifting the blame with the exact same cowardice he had displayed his entire life. He desperately wanted me to deploy my wealth and influence to magically sweep a Tier 1 federal felony under the rug, sacrificing my own integrity to shield his fragile ego. 20 years ago, I caught a teenage Corey stealing $200 from my desk to buy expensive sneakers. I drove him to my toughest construction site, handed him a shovel, and told him he would dig trenches until he repaid every cent. I wanted to teach him that a man must carry the agonizing weight of his own debts. Corey quit after 4 hours, running crying to his mother, completely rejecting the fundamental lesson of personal accountability. I warned him then that the real world does not forgive weakness. He ignored me, choosing the soft, cowardly path instead. "I am not writing a bail check, Corey," I stated, my voice slicing through the static with absolute freezing clarity. "You are not going home because you no longer possess a home. I am not calling any judges, and I am certainly not going to leverage my corporate reputation to rescue a man who actively conspired to declare me legally insane." Corey recoiled as if he had been physically struck, his jaw dropping in sheer horror. "Dad, you cannot leave me in here." He wept openly, thick tears streaming down his face. "I will not survive federal prison. I am your only son. You are supposed to protect me unconditionally. You have the money. It means absolutely nothing to you. Why are you doing this to me?" He slammed his fist against the reinforced glass, throwing a pathetic, impotent tantrum. "You lost the right to call yourself my son the moment you let your wife physically assault your mother," I replied, my tone radiating a lethal, unyielding disgust. "You eagerly sold out your own blood, your heritage, and your morality to appease a woman who fundamentally despised your roots. Megan viewed our family as a bank account attached to a race she considered entirely beneath her. Instead of defending your parents, you actively aided her in trying to rob us blind. You forged signatures, weaponized adult protective services, and stood by while she tried to poison Yvonne's medical regimen. You chose your side, Corey. Now you get to experience the absolute crushing weight of that choice without my wallet acting as your personal shield. I will not spend a single dime to spare you from the federal justice system." The finality in my voice shattered the last remaining fragment of Corey's delusion. The color drained completely from his tear-streaked face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. His shoulders slumped forward, his forehead resting against the dirty glass as the catastrophic reality of his situation finally took root in his mind. He was completely alone. He had no money, no wife, no career, and absolutely no father coming to his rescue. I placed the receiver back onto the metal hook with a sharp, decisive click, cutting off his pathetic sobbing, and walked out of the room. While Corey was being dragged back to his bleak cell by the corrections officers, a completely different scene was unfolding in the pristine administrative lobby of the detention center. Megan's wealthy elitist parents had arrived from the suburbs, flanked by a team of highly paid defense attorneys. They promptly deposited a massive cashier's check to secure her immediate release on bail. Megan walked out of the processing room wearing her wrinkled designer clothes, immediately crying into her mother's arms. She was perfectly executing her rehearsed performance of the traumatized innocent victim who had been violently coerced by a dangerous man. Before even leaving the federal building, Megan instructed her aggressive lawyers to file an emergency restraining order against Corey. She legally cemented her fabricated victim narrative, officially framing her own husband as an abusive monster to save her own skin. Corey was permanently trapped in her web. The security intercom on my mahogany desk buzzed with a sharp, insistent tone. My executive assistant did not wait for my verbal confirmation before announcing that a highly agitated woman had just bypassed the lobby security desk and was currently marching directly toward my private office doors. The heavy frosted glass doors swung open before I could even press the intercom button. Megan stepped into my corporate sanctuary looking absolutely nothing like the arrogant, impeccably groomed socialite who had sneered at my wife just days ago. She wore an oversized, wrinkled trench coat, her blonde hair intentionally messy and unwashed. The dark circles under her eyes were heavily accentuated with smudged makeup meticulously applied to project the aesthetic of a deeply traumatized woman fleeing a horrific situation. She closed the door behind her, leaning heavily against the glass as if she might collapse from sheer exhaustion. "Hollis, please, you have to listen to me before your lawyers completely ruin my life," Megan pleaded, her voice a fragile, engineered whisper. "I know I am the absolute last person you want to see right now, but I came here straight from the courthouse. Corey is an absolute monster. He controlled my finances, monitored my phone, and threatened to destroy my reputation if I did not help him with his insane scheme against you and Yvonne. I was terrified of him. The federal agents do not understand the dynamics of our marriage. They think I was an equal partner in that wire fraud, but I was just a hostage following orders to survive. You are a powerful man. You can make the authorities see the truth. I need your help to prove that your son is the real criminal mastermind here." I sat motionless in my high-backed leather chair, my hands resting perfectly still on the polished wood. Her performance was terrifyingly flawless, a masterclass in weaponized victimhood designed to trigger a protective instinct in any unsuspecting man. She genuinely believed her white tears and fabricated vulnerability would instantly overwrite the high-definition security footage of her destroying Yvonne's medication. I did not interrupt her desperate monologue. I simply observed the microscopic cracks in her facade, noting how her eyes remained sharp and calculating even while her voice shook with manufactured trauma. She was hunting for a specific transaction. When I refused to offer a sympathetic response, Megan abandoned the preamble and aggressively deployed her leverage. "I will testify against Corey in federal court," she stated, dropping the fragile whisper for a cold, transactional tone. "I will hand the prosecutors every single detail of his entire financial operation. I will tell them the fraudulent conservatorship was entirely his idea and that he physically forced me to make that bank call. I will guarantee he serves a maximum prison sentence. But in exchange, you have to contact your attorneys right now and drop the $50,000 forgery charges against me. You need to tell the district attorney that I had your prior authorization to sign Yvonne's name on that loan document. If you give me absolute legal immunity regarding the forgery, I will hand you your son on a silver platter." During the late 90s, aggressive union bosses frequently attempted to extort my construction company by cornering me in private meetings without witnesses. They would demand massive cash kickbacks in exchange for preventing sudden labor strikes, assuming undocumented conversations could never be proven in a court of law. To survive those corrupt encounters, I began carrying custom-engineered recording devices disguised as standard office equipment. I learned very early in my career that when a cornered predator offers you a dirty deal behind closed doors, you never argue with them. You simply let them speak their own legal death sentence into existence. I reached across the desk and picked up a heavy silver fountain pen, resting the tip gently against a blank legal pad. I began to tap it rhythmically. The pen contained a military-grade high-definition audio recorder currently capturing every single syllable of her blatant extortion attempt. "You are asking me to commit perjury, Megan," I replied, keeping my voice completely neutral to encourage her to keep digging her own grave. "You want me to lie to federal prosecutors and claim you had permission to forge my wife's signature, and in return you will completely fabricate a testimony to ensure my son takes the sole fall for a conspiracy you actively orchestrated. You are openly offering to trade his freedom for your own immunity. That is an incredibly bold proposition to bring into my private corporate office." Megan leaned forward, placing her hands flat on my desk, her desperation mutating into pure arrogance. "It is the only smart move you have, Hollis," she hissed confidently. "If we both go to trial, a jury will absolutely believe the terrified white woman over the angry black husband. I will cry on the stand, and I will convince them Corey was a violent manipulator. He will lose anyway. You can either lose with him, or you can drop the forgery charges and let me do your dirty work." I stopped tapping the silver pen. "I am not dropping the charges," I stated coldly. "I am not committing perjury, and I am certainly not negotiating with a parasite. The federal government has your voice print on the wire fraud, and I have the video of your assault on Yvonne. You have absolutely zero leverage." The arrogant smirk completely evaporated from her face. She stepped back from the desk, her eyes darting around the room as the crushing reality of my rejection finally registered. She had walked in assuming I would eagerly betray my own flesh and blood to save my business reputation, projecting her own severe lack of loyalty onto me. When she realized I was completely immune to her manipulation, her carefully constructed victim persona dissolved into sheer, unadulterated panic. She grabbed her oversized coat and stormed out of the office without another word, fleeing the building just as fast as she had arrived. I waited until the heavy glass doors clicked shut before picking up the silver fountain pen. I unscrewed the top casing, extracting the tiny digital memory card and plugged it directly into my encrypted laptop. The audio file was pristine, capturing her entire extortion attempt and her explicit admission that she intended to perjure herself to frame Corey. I did not send the file to Aaron Mitchell or the federal prosecutor. I opened my email client and drafted a new message directed entirely elsewhere. I attached the audio file and sent it directly to the public defender currently assigned to represent my son. Corey was currently sitting in a miserable county jail cell, desperately clinging to the delusion that his wife might eventually come to his rescue. He was about to receive a legally cleared audio recording of Megan explicitly plotting to bury him alive just to save her own skin. The fluorescent light inside the attorney visiting room hummed with a sick, erratic rhythm. Corey sat hunched over the scratched metal table, the bright orange fabric of his jumpsuit clinging to a body that had completely withered over the past 48 hours. His court-appointed public defender, a tired woman carrying an overflowing briefcase, slid a small digital audio player across the table. She did not offer him any false hope or comforting platitudes. She simply pressed the play button. Corey stared blankly at the gray cinderblock wall as Megan's voice filled the tiny claustrophobic room. He heard her frantic engineered whispers begging me for a deal. He heard the utter coldness with which she offered to fabricate a testimony entirely designed to guarantee he received a maximum federal prison sentence. "I will convince them Corey was a violent manipulator. He will lose anyway. Let me do your dirty work." The words were not just a betrayal. They were an absolute total annihilation of his entire reality. The illusion of his powerful, unified marriage shattered into a million jagged pieces, burying themselves deep in his chest. The final shred of his arrogance, the lingering delusion that he was simply a misunderstood victim of circumstance, completely evaporated. Corey dropped his head onto the metal table, letting out a raw, guttural sob that echoed painfully in the small room. He had sacrificed his relationship with his father, terrorized his own mother, and forfeited his entire future for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a disposable meat shield. He was completely broken, finally understanding the true cost of his profound cowardice. The public defender paused the recording, letting the heavy silence stretch out for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Cole," she began, her tone strictly professional. "This audio recording is fully authenticated and legally admissible. Your wife is actively attempting to frame you as the sole architect of a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. The United States Attorney's Office is offering you one single non-negotiable plea deal. If you agree to turn state's evidence and testify completely against Megan Cole, detailing her entire role as the primary mastermind of the bank fraud and the conservatorship conspiracy, they will cap your sentence recommendation at 36 months. If you refuse and she testifies against you, you are facing a mandatory minimum of 15 years. Corey did not hesitate. He did not ask for a moment to think it over or try to negotiate for a better deal. The utter destruction of his ego left him with a sudden, devastating clarity. He reached for the legal pad sitting on the table and requested a pen. He began writing down every single detail of Megan's operation, documenting the forgery, the fake APS call, the hard money loan, and the wire fraud attempt. He was completely surrendering to the federal government, eagerly trading his wife's freedom to salvage whatever tiny fraction of his own life remained. While Corey was actively dismantling his marriage in a county jail cell, I was standing in the sunroom of my own home holding a cup of herbal tea for Yvonne. The morning light poured through the large windows, illuminating a house that was finally genuinely at peace. The moment Corey and Megan had been arrested, the heavy, suffocating cloud of anxiety that had gripped my wife completely lifted. We had changed the locks, upgraded the perimeter security, and formally removed Corey from every single inheritance document and medical directive we possessed. Yvonne took a sip of her tea, looking out at the manicured garden, her bruised wrist finally beginning to heal. We were entirely safe, protected by a fortress of legal boundaries and hard-earned wealth that could never be breached again. Across the city, the federal courthouse was buzzing with the chaotic energy of a high-profile preliminary hearing. Megan strode through the heavy double doors of the courtroom, flanked by 3 incredibly expensive defense attorneys funded entirely by her wealthy parents. She had traded her wrinkled trench coat for a modest pastel-colored suit, clutching a small Bible to complete the visual aesthetic of a deeply traumatized innocent victim. Her parents sat in the front row of the gallery, projecting an aura of affluent outrage, absolutely convinced that their precious daughter was being unfairly persecuted by a malicious, vindictive husband. Megan sat at the defense table, her posture perfectly engineered to elicit maximum sympathy from the presiding judge. She maintained a constant trembling lower lip, glancing nervously around the courtroom as if she expected Corey to leap from the shadows and attack her. She felt completely untouchable. She believed that her family's massive wealth and her high-priced legal team would easily crush the federal prosecutor's case. She expected the judge to immediately grant her bail, dismiss the worst of the charges, and allow her to walk out of the building, a free woman completely insulated by her white privilege and her fabricated victim narrative. The federal prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense veteran, stood up to address the bench. He did not waste time dancing around Megan's performance. Your Honor, the defense has filed a motion requesting leniency, arguing that Mrs. Cole was violently coerced into committing wire fraud by her husband, the prosecutor stated firmly. We are submitting a verified audio recording into evidence that entirely invalidates this claim. The defense attorneys immediately jumped up loudly, objecting to the admission of the evidence, aggressively citing privacy laws and entrapment. The judge slammed his wooden gavel onto the sounding block, the sharp crack silencing the defense table instantly. The objection is overruled. The judge declared, his voice echoing authoritatively across the quiet room. The recording was obtained legally in a corporate office, and it is highly relevant to the defendant's claims of coercion. The prosecutor played the audio file. The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence as Megan's cold, calculating voice filled the air, explicitly offering to perjure herself to send her husband to prison in exchange for a $50,000 payout. The trembling victim facade instantly shattered, exposing the ruthless, sociopathic core of her true personality. Megan's parents stared in absolute open-mouthed horror at their daughter. The high-priced defense attorneys slumped back into their chairs, realizing their entire legal strategy had just been completely incinerated. As the judge began to reject her request for bail, a large man in a cheap suit abruptly stood up from the back row of the public gallery. He walked directly up to the wooden railing separating the gallery from the defense table, loudly dropping a thick stack of legal documents right in front of Megan's parents. The hard money lender had found them officially serving Megan's family with a massive, crippling civil lawsuit to recover the $100,000 she had stolen with my fake deeds. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing off the chamber as the judge called for a mandatory recess before moving to sentencing. The suffocating tension that had gripped the room instantly spilled out into the expansive, marble-lined hallway of the federal courthouse. I stood near a towering column, my hand resting protectively over Yvonne's, offering her a silent anchor of support. We had weathered the storm. We had survived the legal ambush. Now we simply had to wait for the final, inevitable conclusion. Down the hall, the polished, professional facade Megan had so carefully maintained completely shattered. She was pacing frantically, her expensive heels clicking aggressively against the stone floor. Her high-priced defense attorneys stood near a mahogany bench, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, aggressively advising her to remain calm and prepare for the worst. But Megan was far beyond the reach of rational counsel. The revelation that her own husband had turned state's evidence against her, combined with the catastrophic realization that she was entirely bankrupt and facing imminent federal incarceration, triggered a total, spectacular psychological collapse. She shoved past her lead attorney, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She was no longer the fragile, manipulated victim she had pretended to be just moments ago. The carefully constructed shell of the innocent, traumatized wife was entirely stripped away, exposing the vicious, entitled predator lurking beneath. She locked eyes with me from across the wide corridor, her breath coming in ragged, erratic gasps. The sheer, terrifying reality of her impending federal sentence had completely severed her final tether to sanity. She began marching directly toward us, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, ignoring the frantic shouts of her legal team demanding she stop. Megan stormed across the marble floor, stopping just inches from my face. The absolute hatred radiating from her was palpable, a toxic, suffocating heat. "You think you have won, you arrogant old man," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a primal, unfiltered fury. "You think you can just destroy my entire life and walk away?" I stared at her, my expression a solid, impenetrable wall of ice. I did not blink. I did not speak. I simply let her profound, bottomless arrogance fuel the final fatal explosion of her true character. When my total silence refused to grant her the argument she so desperately craved, Megan's rage mutated into something entirely unhinged. She abandoned all pretense of civility, launching into a horrific, racially charged tirade that echoed loudly down the expansive corridor. She screamed that Yvonne and I were nothing but low-class, uneducated trash who had somehow managed to steal a fortune we never deserved. She degraded our roots, insulted our heritage, and violently asserted her own inherent superiority, entirely blinded by a lifelong, deeply ingrained supremacy complex. "You are nothing but street-level contractors who got lucky. You should be bowing down to me," she shrieked, her face turning a mottled, furious red. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend the 40 years of grueling, relentless hard work Yvonne and I had endured to build our legacy. I knew that arguing with a parasite only validates its existence. I maintained absolute, unwavering eye contact, radiating a cold, lethal authority that silently communicated she was completely, irrevocably insignificant to me. I simply placed a steady hand on Yvonne's shoulder and took a single deliberate step to the left, smoothly clearing the line of sight for the individual standing directly behind us. The hallway was not empty. Just 20 feet away, a cluster of local news crews had been stationed outside a neighboring courtroom waiting to cover the high-profile sentencing of a corrupt city official. They had been standing idle bored, waiting for their assigned story to break. But Megan's explosive racist meltdown had instantly hijacked their attention. 3 heavy, professional-grade television cameras were currently mounted on tripods, their red recording lights blinking steadily. 2 field reporters were holding boom microphones, actively capturing every single vile, hateful syllable Megan was screaming at the top of her lungs. Megan was so entirely consumed by her own toxic superiority that she did not even notice the bright camera lights until a reporter stepped forward, thrusting a microphone toward her face. "Mrs. Cole, would you care to comment on the federal wire fraud charges against you?" the reporter asked, his voice sharp and utterly relentless. Megan froze, the color violently draining from her face as the sheer horror of her situation finally registered. She looked from the cameras to my face, realizing with absolute crushing clarity that her career-ending racist tirade had just been broadcast directly into the lenses of 3 major news networks. She stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing in sheer silent panic. The high-priced defense attorneys finally broke through the crowd, aggressively shoving the reporters aside and dragging Megan back toward the elevators. But the damage was already done, and it was entirely devastatingly permanent. The unedited, raw footage of her horrific meltdown was securely captured, a brutal, undeniable testament to her true character that could never be erased or explained away by an expensive public relations firm. Within exactly 2 hours, the raw, unfiltered footage of Megan's racist explosion went incredibly viral, spreading across local news channels and national social media platforms like a digital wildfire. The absolute sheer brutality of her words, coupled with her status as a wealthy, privileged federal defendant, created a massive public spectacle. By mid-afternoon, the intense, unrelenting public backlash reached a critical mass. Megan's wealthy, status-obsessed parents, terrified of the catastrophic damage to their own social standing and corporate reputations, immediately issued a cold, sterile public statement. They formally, unequivocally condemned her actions, officially disowned her behavior, and publicly severed all financial and emotional ties, completely abandoning their daughter to face her federal prison sentence entirely alone. So would you like to proceed to Part 17, the sentencing? The heavy wooden doors of the federal courtroom sealed shut with a resounding thud, locking the guilty inside. The air conditioning hummed a low, sterile note, masking the absolute lack of breathing from the defense table. The final phase of the legal slaughter had officially begun. Corey sat slumped in his uncomfortable wooden chair, staring blankly at the polished floor. The bright orange jumpsuit draped over his shrinking frame, a stark visual representation of his completely hollowed-out spirit. He possessed absolutely no fight left in him. A few feet away, Megan sat entirely isolated. The phalanx of expensive, tailored defense attorneys hired by her wealthy parents was completely gone, replaced by a single, overworked public defender. Her parents were nowhere to be found, having thoroughly erased her from their elite social circles following the viral broadcast of her racist meltdown. The public defender leaned over, whispering harsh, unsympathetic realities into Megan's ear. "You have zero leverage left," the defender muttered, shuffling a thin stack of papers. "Your family formally withdrew all financial support, and the prosecution is fully capitalizing on your public tirade. The plea deal is off the table entirely." Megan shook her head frantically, her unwashed hair falling across her pale, terrified face. "They cannot just abandon me here," she hissed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I am not built for federal prison. You have to call my father again. Tell him I apologize." The public defender let out a heavy, exhausted sigh. "Your father blocked my office number yesterday morning, Mrs. Cole. You are facing this judge completely alone." I sat in the front row of the gallery, my posture rigidly straight, Yvonne resting her hand gently over mine. I watched the absolute terror wash over my daughter-in-law and felt a profound, chilling satisfaction. She had spent her entire life using her privilege as an impenetrable shield, treating people of my skin color as disposable stepping stones. Now, stripped of her wealth and her family name, she was experiencing the terrifying vulnerability of facing a system that no longer recognized her inherent superiority. She was finally subject to the very same rules as everyone else. The presiding judge struck his gavel, commanding absolute silence before peering down at the defendants with sheer, unfiltered disgust. "Corey Cole, your cooperation with the federal government has been noted, but it does not erase the profound cowardice of your initial crimes," the judge declared loudly. "I sentence you to 36 months in federal prison." Corey closed his eyes, accepting his fate. The judge then turned his lethal gaze toward Megan. "Megan Cole, your orchestration of this wire fraud, coupled with the proven endangerment of a vulnerable elder, demonstrates a chilling lack of humanity. Due to the federal enhancements for elder abuse and interstate financial fraud, I sentence you to 60 months in a federal penitentiary." Megan let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as the crushing reality of 5 years behind bars permanently shattered her world. "Before I built my commercial real estate empire, I spent decades laying bricks and pouring concrete in the blistering summer heat. Every single dollar in my portfolio was forged through grueling, backbreaking labor and relentless discipline. I built my fortune specifically so my bloodline would never have to bow their heads to anyone." Corey took that sacred, hard-earned legacy and eagerly handed it over to a woman who viewed our entire existence as a joke. He traded a multi-million-dollar birthright for the superficial approval of a racist parasite. Before finalizing the proceedings, the judge formally invited me to the podium to deliver my victim impact statement. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit, and walked deliberately past the defense table. I did not shed a single tear. I did not offer a trembling voice or a theatrical display of broken-hearted grief. I placed a single sheet of paper on the wooden podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked directly at Corey, projecting the cold, untouchable authority of a man who had successfully defended his fortress. "This court has administered criminal justice," I stated, my voice echoing evenly across the vast, silent room. "But there is a secondary permanent consequence that must be officially entered into the public record today regarding the financial future of the defendants." I did not break eye contact with my son. "Corey, you actively conspired to declare me legally incompetent so you could raid the wealth I bled to build. You failed. Therefore, as of this morning, my legal team has officially dissolved your position in the Horizon Commercial Holdings Trust." I declared, every word striking like a physical blow. "You have been entirely disinherited. Every property, every liquid asset, and every corporate holding will be transferred directly to a charitable foundation empowering young African American entrepreneurs. You will leave federal prison with absolutely nothing, and you will never receive another dime from my estate. You chose to value this woman's greed over your own mother's safety. Now you get to carry the agonizing, lifelong weight of that catastrophic choice. You are no longer my heir." Corey physically slumped forward, his forehead hitting the wooden defense table as the last remaining pillar of his identity completely collapsed. He had secretly harbored a tiny, pathetic hope that I would eventually forgive him, that my immense wealth would somehow be waiting for him upon his release. Hearing me publicly, legally vaporize his birthright severed his final connection to the luxury he craved. The judge offered a solemn, respectful nod in my direction, finalizing the devastating impact of my words before ordering the federal marshals to take the defendants into immediate custody. Two heavily armed marshals approached Megan, roughly grabbing her arms to secure the heavy steel transport cuffs around her wrists. She did not fight them. She stared blankly at the floor, completely hollowed out by the sheer magnitude of her 5-year sentence and total social abandonment. As the marshals forcibly turned her toward the rear exit of the courtroom, her dull eyes drifted across the back row of the public gallery. Sitting completely still in the corner, wearing an ill-fitting suit, was the hulking man from the hard money lending office. He did not break his gaze. He simply flashed a cold, predatory smile, tapping a thick legal envelope against his knee. Megan's breath caught in her throat as the horrifying realization hit her. Her federal prison sentence was only the beginning of an entirely new, inescapable financial nightmare. The neon sign of the roadside diner flickered with a tired, erratic hum, casting a harsh pink glow over the cracked vinyl booths. It was midnight and the establishment was entirely empty, save for a single waitress wiping down the far counter. I slid into a booth near the back, my tailored suit a stark contrast to the sticky, faded table. Sitting across from me was a massive man wearing a cheap suit that struggled to contain his sheer bulk. He was the hard money lender, the very same thug who had served Megan her civil lawsuit in the middle of federal court. He had requested this meeting through an intermediary, foolishly assuming that a wealthy, respectable businessman would quickly fold and pay off his daughter-in-law's criminal debts to avoid a messy public scandal. "You know exactly why we are here, Mr. Cole," the lender growled, placing his thick, scarred hands flat on the table. "Your daughter-in-law handed us a counterfeit deed and walked out with $100,000 of our money. The interest has been compounding rapidly. We served her the civil suit, but we both know she is completely bankrupt and heading to federal prison. Her parents have formally disowned her, and her assets are entirely frozen. That leaves you. You are the only person left with the liquid capital to make us whole. We are willing to offer a slight discount on the interest if you write us a check tonight. If you refuse, we will be forced to pursue alternative, highly uncomfortable collection methods against your family." He leaned forward actively, trying to utilize his physical size to project a lethal, unspoken threat. He expected me to sweat. He expected me to pull out my checkbook, desperate to shield my corporate reputation from the violent reality of the criminal underground. I did not blink. I stared directly into his dark, calculating eyes, letting the heavy silence stretch, until the sheer weight of my calm began to make him visibly uncomfortable. He thought he was intimidating a soft, privileged executive who had spent his entire life protected by high-rise office buildings. He fundamentally misunderstood the man sitting across from him. Before I ever put on a bespoke suit or sat in a mahogany boardroom, I survived the unforgiving streets of a city that actively tried to crush young men of my color. I built my initial construction crews from men who had done hard time, men who understood that respect was currency and weakness was a death sentence. I had navigated violent labor disputes, fended off corrupt union enforcers, and stared down cartel affiliates who tried to extort my work sites in the early 90s. I did not inherit my empire. I bled for it. The idea that a mid-level loan shark could intimidate me with vague, thinly veiled threats was absolutely laughable. "I am not writing you a check for a single cent," I stated, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with a cold, absolute authority that caused the lender to physically recoil. "My daughter-in-law is a federal inmate, and she is currently your problem, not mine. I owe you absolutely nothing, and if you or your associates ever approach my home or my wife again, I will not bother calling my lawyers or the police. I will simply utilize the private security contractors I retain for my commercial properties, and you will cease to be a problem. Do we understand each other perfectly?" The lender's jaw tightened, his initial arrogance evaporating as he recognized the genuine lethal conviction in my eyes. He realized he had completely misjudged his target. "But the fact remains, Mr. Cole," he muttered, his tone losing its aggressive edge. "We are out $100,000. We cannot simply write off that kind of loss. If we cannot collect from her, we have to collect from her family." I reached into my breast pocket, retrieved a single folded document, and slid it across the sticky table. "I am not completely without mercy for a fellow businessman," I replied smoothly. "Megan does not possess liquid capital, but she does possess one final legally binding asset that her parents desperately tried to hide." The lender opened this document, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. It was a certified property deed, fully notarized and officially registered entirely in Megan's name. It detailed the ownership of a small, highly undesirable plot of vacant swampland located 3 states away. Megan's parents had purchased it years ago as a tax write-off and transferred it to her when she turned 18. It was completely worthless in terms of commercial development, but it carried an enormous, suffocating tax liability that her wealthy parents were currently desperate to avoid. They had been trying to quietly offload it for years. "This land is legally hers," I explained, leaning back in my booth. "It is entirely unencumbered by the federal asset freeze because it was acquired long before she committed the wire fraud. Take this deed, march directly up to her parents' sprawling estate in the suburbs, and legally seize the property. If they refuse to cooperate, you can place a massive, highly public lien on the land, dragging their prestigious family name into a brutal, humiliating civil foreclosure process. They care about their social standing more than they care about their own daughter. They will quickly write you a check for your $100,000 just to make you disappear and keep their names out of the local papers." The lender stared at the deed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his scarred face. He recognized the sheer, devastating brilliance of the maneuver. I was handing him the exact legal leverage required to extort the very people who had raised a monster. He carefully folded the document and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "We appreciate the tip, Mr. Cole," he grunted, offering a brief, respectful nod. "Consider our business concluded." He slid out of the booth and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the dark night to actively cannibalize the last remaining shreds of Megan's family. I sat in the quiet diner for a moment longer, finishing my black coffee. I had successfully completely isolated the threat, neutralizing the criminal element by redirecting their violence entirely away from my family. I stood up, left a generous tip for the waitress, and walked out to my car. I drove home through the empty city streets, returning to a house that was entirely secure, looking forward to the peace Yvonne was waiting to share. Exactly 12 months after the heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary closed on my son, a thin white envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address bore the unmistakable institutional stamp of the Federal Corrections Facility, carrying the stark reality of the new life Corey had desperately earned. I held the cheap, coarse paper in my hands, standing alone in the sunlit foyer of my home. The silence around me was no longer heavy or hostile. It was the peaceful, earned quiet of a fortress that had successfully repelled a brutal siege. The envelope felt incredibly light, yet it carried the dense, suffocating weight of a shattered family legacy. I walked slowly into my study, sitting at the mahogany desk where I had once systematically dismantled his fraudulent life. I carefully sliced the seal open with a silver letter opener, pulling out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was erratic, a severe departure from his previously polished, arrogant corporate signature. "Dad," the letter began, lacking any excuses or defensive preamble. "I am writing this because I finally understand that I have absolutely no right to ask for your forgiveness. I spent the last year entirely stripped of my illusions, sitting in a cell where my name means absolutely nothing. I was a coward. I allowed a woman who despised our roots to disrespect my mother, and I actively plotted to steal the empire you bled to build. I traded my family for a fake life, and I deserve every single day of this sentence. I am not asking for bail or money or even a reply. I just need you to know that I finally see the monster I became." It was a total, unconditional surrender to the brutal reality of his actions. I read the words 3 times, searching for the familiar manipulative angle, the hidden request for leverage or financial salvation. There was none. He had finally hit absolute rock bottom, and the crushing impact had forced him to look directly at his own profound cowardice. As a father, a deep primal grief washed over me, a phantom ache for the innocent boy I had once taught to ride a bicycle on our cracked driveway. I felt the profound tragedy of a son who required federal incarceration, just to learn the basic concept of personal accountability. For a brief, fleeting moment, the paternal instinct urged me to pick up a pen and write him back. I could offer him a tiny sliver of hope, a microscopic lifeline to sustain him through the bleak, violent reality of his 36-month sentence. But compassion without boundaries is the exact weakness that breeds parasites. If I offered him absolution now, I would simply reset the cycle, validating the toxic belief that severe betrayal can be erased with a carefully worded apology letter. Accountability is not a temporary posture. It is a permanent, lifelong burden. I folded the notebook paper along its original creases, refusing to let my emotions override the brutal, necessary logic of consequence. The trust between a father and a son is a sacred bridge. Once intentionally burned down for profit, it cannot be magically rebuilt with cheap words. When I first launched Horizon Commercial Holdings, I had a business partner who secretly embezzled $30,000 from our initial operating budget. He came to me crying, offering profound apologies and promising to work for free until the debt was settled. I did not accept his apology. I reported him to the authorities and rebuilt the firm entirely on my own. I learned then that a man who will steal from you once will inevitably rationalize stealing from you again. Forgiveness is a beautiful spiritual concept, but it has absolutely no place in the survival of an empire. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, dropping Corey's letter into a dark locked compartment alongside the old photographs of the boy he used to be. I closed the drawer with a firm, decisive click, sealing the past away permanently. I stood up and walked out of the study, moving toward the master bedroom, where Yvonne was actively preparing for our future. 2 large premium leather suitcases sat open on the pristine duvet. She was meticulously folding bright, vibrant summer dresses and wide-brimmed sun hats, her face radiating an absolute unburdened joy that I had not seen in years. We were completely untethered from the financial and emotional leeches that had spent the last decade draining our vitality. The wealth I had spent 40 years building was finally serving its true intended purpose. It was actively funding our absolute peace of mind. "Are you certain we packed enough sunscreen for a whole month?" Yvonne asked, turning to me with a brilliant, carefree smile. I walked over, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. "If we run out, we will simply buy the entire pharmacy," I replied smoothly, earning a soft, musical laugh from the woman who had anchored my entire life. We had chartered a private jet for a 30-day unrestricted tour of the Caribbean. We were going to spend a month walking on white sand beaches, eating fresh seafood, and watching the sunset over crystal-clear waters without checking our phones for a single manufactured emergency. There would be no frantic calls demanding rent money. There would be no arrogant dinner parties to endure. There was only the vast open horizon of a life we had thoroughly earned, perfectly insulated by the massive, untouchable financial fortress I had constructed. The immense burden of constantly bracing for the next familial betrayal had completely vanished. We were no longer hostages in our own home. As I helped Yvonne zip the heavy luggage shut, I felt a deep, resonating physical lightness in my chest. We were stepping into the golden years of our lives entirely on our own terms. The parasites had been surgically removed, their toxic influence entirely neutralized. The wealth was no longer a target for greedy, entitled thieves. It was a powerful tool that I was about to deploy in a manner that would secure our legacy forever. Before our flight the next morning, we had one final critical engagement to attend. The grand ballroom of the downtown Civic Center was packed with the most influential political and business leaders in the city. We were seated at the center table of a prestigious charity gala, surrounded by individuals who actually respected the empire I had built. When the keynote speaker finished his address, the master of ceremonies called my name. The room erupted in polite, respectful applause. I adjusted my tailored tuxedo jacket, gave Yvonne a proud, lingering look, and walked deliberately up the carpeted stairs to the illuminated wooden podium. I looked out over the sea of affluent faces gripping the edges of the podium with absolute authority. "Tonight, I am permanently reallocating my family's wealth," I announced, my voice booming across the silent room. "I officially present the inaugural Yvonne Cole Scholarship for Young Aspiring African-American Entrepreneurs." The thunderous applause echoing through the grand ballroom slowly faded into a reverent, profound silence as I stepped down from the illuminated wooden podium. I took my wife by the hand, feeling the absolute triumphant warmth radiating from her fingers as we walked out into the cool evening air. The valet brought my car around to the front of the Civic Center. The city skyline sparkled against the dark velvet of the night, no longer looming over me like a hostile battlefield, but resting peacefully as a completely conquered territory. I opened the passenger door for Yvonne, ensuring she was securely seated before walking around to the driver's side. Gripping the leather steering wheel, I looked directly into the rearview mirror, but I was not just looking at my own reflection. I am speaking directly to you now, the people who have listened to this entire brutal saga unfold. It took less than a month to completely dismantle a toxic illusion that had been festering inside my family for years. We started at a celebratory dinner that was violently interrupted by sheer, unchecked arrogance. We navigated through forged signatures, fabricated medical emergencies, and federal wire fraud, all orchestrated by 2 parasites who mistakenly believed my patience was a symptom of senility. I systematically stripped them of their luxury cars, their luxury penthouses, their corporate careers, and finally, their freedom. I did not raise my voice, and I did not throw a single punch. I simply utilized the devastating, unyielding power of absolute accountability. Corey and Megan thought they were playing a simple game of manipulation, entirely unaware they had challenged a man who spent 40 years learning how to completely crush his adversaries legally, financially, and permanently. There is a dangerous, deeply ingrained societal misconception that blood relation automatically requires you to endure endless psychological and financial abuse. People are conditioned to believe that family is a sacred, unbreakable contract, even when the other party is actively trying to destroy your life. They preach forgiveness as if it is a mandatory tax you must pay to maintain the illusion of a happy home. I completely reject that fragile philosophy. Unconditional love should never equate to unconditional tolerance for malicious exploitation. Loyalty must be a mutual exchange, or it is nothing more than voluntary emotional servitude. If a branch on a massive oak tree becomes deeply infected with rot, you do not politely ask the disease to stop spreading. You do not negotiate with the decay while it slowly poisons the trunk. You take a sharp saw and you violently sever the infected wood to save the rest of the tree. Corey and Megan became that toxic spreading rot the very second they decided my wife was a disposable obstacle in their path to unearned wealth. Society expects older parents to quietly shrink into the background, handing over the fruits of their lifelong labor to ungrateful, entitled children simply because time is passing. I refuse to be a passive victim in my own life story. I am the sole architect of my empire, and I retain the absolute authority to evict anyone who disrespects the sanctuary I built. Long before I ever laid the first brick of Horizon Commercial Holdings, my grandfather taught me a fundamental lesson on the sweltering porch of his farmhouse in Georgia. He looked at his calloused, bleeding hands and told me that a man only leaves behind what he has fiercely protected. He said a legacy is not just the money you leave in the bank, but the absolute standard of respect you demand from the world while you are breathing. I built my fortune to elevate my family, not to fund the racist delusions of an arrogant daughter-in-law. Megan's ultimate downfall was rooted entirely in her supreme, blinding hubris. She operated under the historically dangerous assumption that her skin color and her affluent suburban background granted her automatic dominion over a working-class African-American family. She fundamentally believed she could stroll into my house, assault my wife, and simply snap her fingers to make my wealth her own. She severely underestimated the lethal, calculated intelligence required to build a commercial empire from scratch. She thought my silence was weakness, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actively measuring her for a legal coffin. Her arrogance blinded her to the federal traps I set, leading her to willingly execute her own financial and social suicide. She is currently sitting in a federal cell because she assumed she was naturally smarter than the black man paying her rent. My son, however, committed a sin far worse than simple arrogance. Corey's failure was born of profound, despicable cowardice. He watched his wife physically attack the woman who gave him life, and instead of defending his mother, he cowardly tried to manage the optics. He actively sold out his own bloodline for the fleeting approval of a woman who viewed his heritage as a joke. He chose to be an accomplice to extortion and fraud rather than stand up like a man and face the consequences of his debt. He wanted the rewards of a kingdom without ever bearing the weight of the crown. I have absolutely zero sympathy for his federal sentence. A man who cannot defend his wife against his own family deserves neither. Corey proved he possessed absolutely no spine, and the universe quickly crushed him for it. The power dynamic in my life has been permanently corrected. Corey and Megan assumed that my advancing age meant I was losing my grip on reality. They assumed my wealth was just sitting there ripe for the picking by the younger, supposedly sharper generation. I proved that the fire that built my empire still burns incredibly hot. I completely flipped the narrative, utilizing the very legal and financial systems they tried to weaponize against me to permanently lock them away. They are currently wearing orange jumpsuits while I am wearing a tailored tuxedo, driving my wife to the airport. The absolute freedom I feel right now is staggering. The future is entirely unwritten, and it belongs exclusively to Yvonne and me. We are no longer guarding our bank accounts against the greedy hands of ungrateful heirs. The millions of dollars I accumulated will be actively used to fund the brilliant minds of young students who actually possess the grit, respect, and integrity that my son sorely lacked. My legacy is entirely secure, completely cleansed of the parasites that sought to drain it. I won the war, and I am finally claiming the absolute peace I rightfully earned. Did you like my story? Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member for your own peace? Let us meet in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more life stories like this. See you in the next one. There is one final lesson I must impart before closing this chapter of my life forever. It concerns the dangerous illusion of age and the fatal mistake of underestimating silent observation. Society conditions the younger generation to believe that growing older inherently means growing weaker. They look at our gray hair, our measured steps, and our quiet evenings, and they falsely equate our physical slowing with cognitive decline. They assume that because we no longer shout, we have lost our teeth. This is the exact arrogance that led Megan and Corey straight into a federal prison cell. True power does not need to scream to establish its dominance. The most lethal weapon a man can possess is his silence. When Megan disrespected my wife and when Corey cowered behind her designer dress, I did not react with a loud, explosive tantrum. I did not flip tables or hurl empty threats. Amateurs broadcast their anger, giving their enemies the blueprint of their next move. A seasoned architect of wealth knows that silence is the ultimate predator. While my son and his wife were busy talking, planning, and spending money, they did not own I was quietly building a legal and financial cage so tight that they would never see the bars until the door permanently locked behind them. Aging does not dull the blade of an established man. It actually refines it to a very sharp edge. I spent 4 long decades surviving corporate warfare, structural racism, and economic recessions. Every scar I carry is a masterclass in survival. The younger generation, especially those who inherited their comfort, mistakenly believe their technological fluency makes them superior. They think they can outsmart a veteran with a few forged documents and a stolen smartphone. They completely forget that the foundations of the systems they try to manipulate were poured by the very people they are trying to steal from. My absolute victory was not just about protecting my bank accounts. It was entirely about protecting the fundamental dignity of the life Yvonne and I built together from scratch. We absolutely refused to ever become silent victims of our own massive success. We refused to let ungrateful heirs treat our precious twilight years as a waiting room for their inheritance. You must never allow anyone, regardless of their bloodline or marriage certificate, to view your kindness as a vulnerability. Protect your peace with the exact same ruthlessness you used to build your wealth. Your twilight years belong to you and to you alone. Did this final reflection resonate with you? Have you ever had to teach someone the hard lesson that your silence was not submission, but preparation? I want to read your stories in the comments section below. Share your experiences of taking back your power from those who underestimated you. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more empowering life lessons, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support keeps these truths alive. Thank you.